Prologue, a flashback interlude. The warm glow of a summer evening bathed the neighborhood park in soft hues of orange and pink. The sound of cicadas buzzed faintly in the distance, mingling with the occasional chirp of birds returning to their nests. Kaito and Hana, no more than 8 or 9 years old, sat together on the swings, their bare feet scuffing against the dusty ground as they idly rocked back and forth. Hana's golden hair was tied up in messy pigtails, her cheeks slightly flushed from a long day of playing tag with Kaito and Ren. She leaned back, her green eyes gazing at the horizon, where the setting sun painted the sky in breathtaking strokes of amber and violet. "Kaito," Hana said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. Her tone carried the casual weight of childhood sincerity, as if she were about to share an important secret. "Yeah?" Kaito replied, his dark eyes fixed on his sneakers as he kicked at a small rock near his swing. "If we're not married by the time we're, like, super old, like 25, let's just marry each other," she declared matter-of-factly, her small hands gripping the chains of her swing tightly. Kaito blinked, startled by her sudden proclamation. He looked up at her, his face turning slightly red. "What? Why me?" Hana grinned, swinging a little higher as she tilted her head to look at him. "Why not? You're nice to me, and you always help me when I fall. Plus, you're my best friend. Isn't that what you're supposed to do when you grow up? Marry your best friend?" Kaito's lips parted as if to respond, but he found himself at a loss for words. Instead, he looked down, his ears burning. I guess. "See?" Hana said triumphantly, her voice filled with the unshakable confidence of a child who believed they had the world figured out. "It's a deal, then." Kaito glanced at her, unsure whether she was serious or just being her usual playful self. But the way she smiled at him, bright and unguarded, made something in his chest tighten. Even if it was just a joke, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of comfort in her words. "Fine," he muttered, kicking at the dirt. "But only if we're really old." "Deal," Hana said, extending her pinky toward him. With a small, hesitant smile, Kaito hooked his pinky around hers. The two of them laughed, the sound echoing in the twilight, as if the moment belonged only to them. The memory faded, replaced by the cool light of the present day. Kaito sat at his desk, staring at his sketchbook, his pencil hovering above the page but not moving. The warmth of that childhood promise felt distant now, like a fading echo of a song he could barely recall. His phone buzzed on the desk, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from Aiko. "Rooftop after school? Got something cool to show you." Kaito exhaled slowly, the weight of the memory still lingering in his chest. With a quiet resolve, he picked up his phone and typed a quick reply. "Sure. See you then." As he set his phone down, he glanced at the small charm bracelet sitting on his desk, the one he had given Hana and never seen her wear. His fingers brushed against it briefly before he pushed the thought aside, standing and grabbing his bag. It was time to move forward, even if the echoes of the past still whispered in his mind. The quiet hum of the night wrapped around them as Kaito and Aiko sat together on a grassy hill overlooking the town. The stars above seemed endless, twinkling like scattered shards of light across the velvet darkness. Aiko lay back with her arms folded behind her head, her pink ponytail splayed out against the grass, while Kaito sat upright, knees pulled to his chest. For a long while, neither spoke, letting the night's tranquility fill the silence. Then Aiko broke it, her voice softer than usual. "Isn't it crazy how we're looking at stars that might not even exist anymore?" she murmured, her gaze fixed upward. Kaito glanced at her, his dark eyes reflecting faint starlight. "Yeah, kind of like chasing ghosts." Aiko turned her head toward him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Do you ever make wishes on stars?" Kaito raised an eyebrow. "What are we, 6?" She laughed, the sound light but subdued compared to her usual bright energy. "Oh, come on! Don't tell me you've never done it! Not even once?" "I might have," he admitted, leaning back on his hands. "But I don't think I wished for anything that came true." Aiko tilted her head thoughtfully, then sat up suddenly, her blue eyes sparkling with mischief. "Well, I just made a wish. Want to know what it was?" Kaito smirked faintly, his tone dry. "Sure." She shook her head quickly. "Oh no, wait. I can't tell you. If I do, it won't come true." Kaito rolled his eyes. "Seriously? You believe in that superstition?" Aiko stuck her tongue out at him, but there was a flicker of something deeper in her expression, something Kaito couldn't quite place. Maybe I do. And maybe you should, too. What's the harm in keeping a little mystery alive? He leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. Fine. Keep your wish to yourself, but it must have been pretty important. For a moment, Aiko hesitated, her playful demeanor faltering. She looked up at the sky, her gaze distant. It's nothing big, she said lightly, but the slight crack in her voice betrayed her. Kaito frowned, sitting up straighter. You sure about that? You don't have to tell me, but you don't have to brush it off either. Aiko gave a small, self-conscious laugh, brushing a strand of pink hair behind her ear. It's just, I wished I wouldn't mess things up, that I could hold on to the things that matter. Her words hung in the air, fragile yet heavy. For a brief moment, Kaito saw through the cracks in her cheerful facade, the hesitation in her voice, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She always seemed so full of energy, so effortlessly bright, but now he realized it might have been a mask, a way to keep people from seeing whatever storm she was carrying inside. That's not dumb, he said finally, his voice quieter than usual. It's honest. Aiko looked at him, her smile softening into something more vulnerable. Thanks. What about you? What would you wish for, Mr. Cynic? Kaito turned his gaze upward, his mind swirling with memories and emotions. He thought of the rejection that had left him hollow, the uncertainty that lingered even now. Then he thought of Aiko, the way she barged into his life with her boundless energy, pulling him out of his darkness without even trying. I'd wish for things to feel lighter, he said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. Just for once. Aiko studied him for a moment, her blue eyes searching his face. Then she leaned closer, her voice low but sincere. You're carrying a lot, aren't you? Kaito blinked, caught off guard by her observation. He shrugged, his lips curving into a faint smirk. Maybe. I guess we all do. Yeah, Aiko said, her voice softening. But you don't have to carry it alone, you know. Her words struck something deep within him, and he felt his chest tighten. Before he could respond, Aiko flashed him a grin, her usual brightness returning. Anyway, let's see if these star wishes actually work. Kaito chuckled faintly, shaking his head. Sure, we'll see. As they began walking back down the hill together, the night's quiet wrapped around them once more. Aiko chatted about constellations she'd learned as a kid, her voice light and animated. But Kaito noticed how her steps slowed every now and then, how her gaze flickered downward when she thought he wasn't looking. She wasn't as carefree as she wanted him to believe, and for some reason that realization made him want to know her even more. When they reached the edge of town, Aiko turned to him, her grin still in place but softer now. Thanks for tonight, Kaito. I needed this. He nodded, his voice steady but quiet. Yeah, me too. Aiko hesitated, looking down at her feet for a moment before glancing back up at him. So, what would you really wish for? Kaito paused, his dark eyes meeting hers. He hesitated, then smiled faintly. To keep spending time with you. Aiko's expression froze for a heartbeat. Her usual playfulness faltered as something heavier flashed in her eyes, an emotion Kaito couldn't name. She forced a smile, her voice softer than before. That's sweet. Just honest, Kaito said, shrugging lightly. Aiko nodded, her grin returning, but it felt more fragile than usual. Good night, Kaito. Good night, Aiko. As she turned and walked away, Kaito stood there, staring after her. Something in her reaction lingered with him, a weight he couldn't quite shake. The next day, a new development. The sun filtered through the classroom windows as students filed into their seats, chatting excitedly about the day ahead. Kaito slumped into his desk, still groggy from a restless night. Aiko's words, and her reaction to his wish, had lingered in his mind, keeping him awake far longer than he'd intended. Her grin had been as bright as ever, but something beneath it felt off. He couldn't shake the thought that there was more to her than she let on. Yo, Kaito! Ren plopped down into the desk beside him, as cheerful as ever. You look like you pulled an all-nighter. Did you finally get into that MMO I told you about? Kaito gave a faint smirk. Not quite. Let me guess, Ren teased, leaning closer. You were up thinking about Aiko. Kaito stiffened, his smirk fading. What are you talking about? Ren's grin widened. Oh, come on. It's obvious. You two have been spending a lot of time together. It's kind of cute, actually. Ren, Kaito muttered, his tone flat. Drop it. Before Ren could push further, the teacher entered the room, silencing the chatter as she strode to the front of the class. She carried a stack of papers and a smile that hinted at something unusual. Good morning, everyone, she began, her voice cutting through the hum of conversation. I have some exciting news. Next week, we'll be going on a field trip. The class erupted in murmurs, a mix of surprise and excitement. Kaito straightened in his seat, his interest piqued. We'll be visiting the Kuroyama Forest Reserve, the teacher continued. It's a chance to learn about local ecology, spend some time in nature, and most importantly, get out of the classroom for a day. Ren let out a low whistle. Kuroyama, huh? That's pretty far. We're going to need a bus or two for this. Kaito nodded absently, his mind already wandering. A trip like this would be a welcome distraction. But it also meant spending the day surrounded by classmates, something he wasn't particularly eager about. Pairs will be assigned for the hike, the teacher added, holding up a clipboard. I'll be finalizing the list later today, so no arguments about who you're stuck with. The announcement drew groans from several students, but Ren just grinned. Hope I get someone fun. Maybe you'll get paired with Aiko, huh, Kaito? Kaito ignored him, staring at the board as the teacher moved on to the day's lesson. His thoughts drifted again, this time to Hana. He hadn't seen her that morning, but he couldn't shake the memory of her smile from the day before, or the tension he'd sensed in her voice when she declined Aiko's invitation. When the lunch bell rang, Kaito grabbed his bento and headed to the rooftop. It had become his usual spot with Aiko, a quiet refuge from the bustling cafeteria. As he reached the door, he paused, hearing voices on the other side. Aiko, you don't know him like I do. Hana's voice was firm, though there was a strain beneath it. And what's that supposed to mean? Aiko shot back, her tone sharper than usual. I don't have to know his entire life story to care about him. Kaito froze, his hand on the door. His chest tightened as he realized they were talking about him. I'm just saying, Hana continued, her voice softer now. Kaito's been through a lot. I don't want to see him get hurt again. Aiko's laugh was short and bitter. And you think I'd hurt him? That's funny coming from you. The silence that followed was suffocating. Kaito clenched his fist, debating whether to step in. Before he could decide, the door swung open and Aiko stormed out, nearly colliding with him. Kaito, she said, startled. Her expression softened for a moment before hardening again. I'll see you later. She brushed past him, her pink ponytail swaying as she disappeared down the stairs. Kaito stared after her, then turned to see Hana standing by the railing, her arms crossed and her face pale. You heard that, didn't you? She asked quietly, her green eyes meeting his. Kaito nodded, his stomach twisting. What's going on, Hana? Hana sighed, turning her gaze to the horizon. I don't trust her. She acts like she knows you, but she doesn't. Not really. Kaito frowned, stepping closer. Why does it matter so much to you? You're the one who said you just wanted to stay friends. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. After a long pause, she grabbed her bento and walked past him without another word. The tension from lunch lingered as the final bell rang. Kaito packed his things slowly, his mind replaying the confrontation on the rooftop. Just as he was about to leave, his phone buzzed. Meet me at the park? I need to clear my head. He hesitated for only a moment before replying. On my way. At the park, a moment of vulnerability. The park was quiet, the only sound coming from the faint rustling of leaves and the occasional chirp of a bird. Kaito walked the familiar path toward the swings, his steps slow and measured. He spotted Aiko almost immediately, sitting alone with her pink ponytail slightly tousled by the evening breeze. She wasn't swinging, just sitting still, her head slightly bowed, her usual brightness dimmed in the fading light. Hey, Kaito called softly as he approached. Aiko looked up, a faint smile tugging at her lips, though it didn't reach her eyes. Hey, she said, her voice quieter than usual. Kaito sat down on the swing beside her, the chains creaking slightly under his weight. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence settling between them like a fragile thread. Rough day? Kaito asked finally, his voice careful. Aiko let out a dry laugh, leaning back against the swing's chain. You could say that. Let's just say your friend Hana isn't my biggest fan. Kaito frowned, his grip tightening on the swing's chain. She doesn't know you like I do. Maybe not, Aiko murmured, staring at the ground. She dragged the tip of her shoe across the dirt, drawing a small line. But what if she's not entirely wrong? What if I'm not what you think I am? Kaito tilted his head, his brows furrowing. What are you talking about? Aiko turned to face him, her blue eyes searching his face. You make me sound like I'm this amazing person, like I'm some kind of light that brightens up your world. But what if I'm not? What if I'm just a normal girl? Kaito blinked, taken aback. He hadn't expected this from her. The Aiko he knew was so self-assured, so confident. Seeing her like this, vulnerable and uncertain, was almost jarring. You're not just a normal girl, he said finally, his voice steady. At least not to me. Aiko raised an eyebrow, her lips quirking into a half smile. And what does that mean? Kaito exhaled slowly, leaning forward slightly, his hands gripping the swing's chains. Before I met you, everything felt gray, like my world was just this dull, lifeless place where every day blended into the next. But then you came along, and it was like someone flipped a switch. Suddenly, there's color. Bright, chaotic, overwhelming color. You make things feel alive. Aiko's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, she said nothing. Then she looked away, her smile fading. That's sweet, Kaito. But what if I can't live up to that? What if I'm not as bright as you think I am? Kaito's chest tightened at the raw vulnerability in her voice. Aiko, and what if one day, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, I'm not around anymore? Would the color just disappear? Kaito froze, the weight of her words settling heavily in the air between them. He stared at her, searching for the usual light in her expression, but it wasn't there. I don't understand, he said slowly. Why would you say something like that? Aiko looked at him, her blue eyes glistening with unshed tears. Because I don't want you to rely on me for everything. I don't want to be the reason your world has color. What happens if I mess up? Or if I'm not here anymore? I don't want to let you down, Kaito. Kaito's heart ached at the vulnerability in her voice, and he reached out instinctively, his hand brushing against hers. Aiko, you're not letting me down. You've never let me down. She laughed softly, but it was hollow. You say that now. I mean it, Kaito interrupted, his voice firm. You're not perfect, Aiko. I know that, but that doesn't change how I feel. You're not just some idea to me. You're you. Aiko stared at him, her lips parting slightly as if to respond, but no words came. Kaito hesitated, then spoke again, his voice softer this time. Last night, you asked me what I wished for. I didn't answer because I thought it was dumb, but I think I need to tell you now. Aiko blinked, tilting her head slightly. What was it? Kaito took a deep breath, his gaze steady. I wish that I could keep spending time with you. Forever. The words hung in the air, and Aiko's eyes widened. Her cheeks turned a soft shade of pink, but the weight in her expression remained. Kaito, she began, but her voice wavered. I don't know what you're going through, he continued, his tone gentle, and I won't push you to tell me. But I need you to know that, no matter what, I want you in my life, okay? Aiko looked away, blinking rapidly as she fought back tears. She nodded once, her grip on the swing chain tightening. Okay, she said softly. The two sat in silence for a while, the faint hum of cicadas filling the air. Kaito glanced at her, a small, hopeful smile tugging at his lips. And for the first time, Aiko didn't hide behind her usual playful grin. Instead, she gave him a small, genuine smile. A smile that spoke of gratitude, fear, and something else Kaito couldn't quite place. When they finally stood to leave, the weight in Kaito's chest felt lighter, though a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that Aiko's had grown heavier. Kaito lay on his bed that night, staring at the ceiling as the events of the day replayed in his mind. The faint glow of his desk lamp cast long shadows across his room, its soft hum the only sound breaking the stillness. His phone buzzed beside him, a single message from Ren lighting up the screen. Yo, tomorrow's basketball. You in? Kaito ignored the message, letting the phone fall silent. He couldn't focus on anything else right now, not Ren's casual invitations, not the stack of unfinished homework sitting on his desk. All he could think about was Aiko. Her words, her smile, her vulnerability, it all swirled in his mind like an unrelenting storm. He had spent so much time convincing himself that his feelings for Hana were all-consuming, that they had defined his sense of love and affection. And yet, here he was. completely thrown off balance by someone so different, so unexpected. "What is wrong with me?" he muttered, throwing an arm over his eyes. "This is way too fast." Kaito thought back to her laugh, the way her eyes lit up when she teased him, the way her voice trembled when she asked, "What if I wasn't around anymore?" He felt a pang in his chest, equal parts warmth and worry. She had a way of pulling him in, of making him feel like he was the only person in the world who mattered to her in that moment. And that scared him. He sat up, running a hand through his hair. The room felt too small, too suffocating. He opened his window, letting the cool night breeze wash over him. The stars above twinkled faintly, and for a moment he thought back to their conversation under the sky. Her wish remained a mystery, but his had been clear. The words he'd spoken to her, "I want to spend time with you forever," echoed in his head. He hadn't meant to say it. He hadn't even realized he felt that way until the words were already out. "Forever?" he whispered to himself, the weight of the word heavy on his tongue. What does that even mean? Was this love? The thought struck him like a jolt. How could it be? He barely knew her, and yet every moment they spent together felt like it was changing him. Like she was coloring in parts of his life he hadn't even realized were gray. But wasn't that too soon? Too reckless? He thought of Hana, of the years they'd spent together, the memories they'd built. His feelings for her had grown slowly, naturally, like a seed planted in his heart that had been nurtured over time. But with Aiko, it was different. It wasn't gradual. It was a sudden, blazing light that had caught him off guard. What if I'm just confusing things? He thought. What if this isn't real? And yet, as much as he tried to push the feelings aside, he couldn't deny the way his heart raced when Aiko smiled at him, the way her presence seemed to fill the void he'd felt after Hana's rejection. He buried his face in his hands, groaning softly. "I'm an idiot," he muttered, "a complete idiot." But even as he tried to convince himself of that, the memory of Aiko's genuine smile lingered in his mind, a beacon cutting through the fog of his confusion. For now, he resolved to take things one step at a time. Whatever this was, love, infatuation, or something else entirely, he didn't have to figure it all out tonight. But as he lay back down and stared at the ceiling once more, one thought refused to leave him. "I think I'm falling for her." The realization was like a wave crashing over him, leaving Kaito disoriented as he stared at the ceiling in the dim light of his room. "I'm falling for her." The words replayed in his mind, louder each time. His chest tightened, a mix of exhilaration and fear swirling inside him. Aiko had brought color to a world he had always thought was gray, her laughter, her energy, her warmth. But that realization also terrified him. His thoughts drifted back to their conversation under the stars. Her words, soft and vulnerable, echoed in his head. What if I wasn't around anymore? It had sounded like a joke at first, but the weight behind it lingered. She wasn't as carefree as she seemed. There was more to her than her bright smiles and teasing remarks, and Kaito had to respect that. "I can't make the same mistake," he muttered to himself, his fists clenching the blanket. With Hana, he had waited too long. He'd bottled up his emotions until they spilled out in a confession that ended in rejection and awkwardness. He couldn't let things with Aiko spiral the same way. She deserved better than to be burdened by his feelings, especially when she was already dealing with her own struggles. The thought of confronting her in person felt overwhelming. His mind churned through scenarios, all of which felt awkward or forced. Then his eyes drifted to his phone on the nightstand. Maybe I should just say it now, he thought. Aiko wasn't one to hold grudges, and she'd appreciate honesty. He grabbed his phone, hesitating for a moment as he pulled up their text thread. Her last message was still there, a picture of the sky she had sent with a cheerful caption. "It was fun hanging out today. Let's stargaze again soon." Kaito sighed and began typing. "Hey, Aiko, are you still awake?" The typing bubble appeared almost immediately, and then her reply came. "Yep, what's up?" Kaito stared at the screen for a moment, his heart pounding. This wasn't easy, but he knew it was necessary. Taking a deep breath, he typed out his next message. "I've been thinking, I might have come off a little strong earlier. I didn't mean to make things weird." Aiko's response came quickly. "Weird? What do you mean?" Kaito hesitated before continuing. Like saying you brought color to my world and all that. I meant it. But I don't want to make you uncomfortable. You don't need that kind of pressure. The typing bubble stayed for a few moments before her reply appeared. Pressure? Kaito, you didn't make me uncomfortable. I thought it was sweet. Kaito felt a flicker of relief, but pressed on. He needed to be clear. I just don't want you to feel like I'm expecting anything. You've been a really good friend to me, and I don't want to mess that up. There was a longer pause this time, and Kaito stared at the screen, his stomach twisting in knots. Finally, her response came. I get it, Kaito, and I appreciate you saying that, but you're not messing anything up. Honestly, I like spending time with you too. Kaito's breath caught. Her words were simple, but carried a warmth that eased the tension in his chest. Thanks. I just wanted to make sure we were okay. We are. Now stop overthinking it and get some sleep, okay? Kaito chuckled softly, a small smile tugging at his lips. All right, good night, Aiko. As he set his phone down, Kaito felt a sense of relief and clarity. Aiko had a way of grounding him, of making him feel like things would be okay. For now, he'd focus on the present and on building their friendship. Whatever else came next, he'd take it one step at a time. The classroom buzzed with energy as students discussed the upcoming trip. Kaito, sitting at his desk, was quietly sketching while Ren lounged nearby, tossing a pencil in the air like it was a football. Aiko had pulled her chair closer, her usual bright smile lighting up the space. This trip's going to be amazing, Aiko said, propping her chin on her hands. Have you guys thought about your group yet? Ren leaned back in his chair with a grin. Naturally, Kaito and I are a package deal. Wherever he goes, I go. Kaito smirked faintly, his pencil pausing mid-sketch. Is that so? Absolutely, Ren said, feigning mock seriousness. It's a brotherhood. Aiko laughed, twirling a strand of her pink hair. Then I guess I should stick close too. You guys need someone to keep things lively. Before Kaito could reply, Hana approached, her golden hair catching the sunlight streaming through the windows. She stopped at the edge of their circle, her expression composed but curious. What's this about groups? She asked, her voice casual but with an undertone of interest. We're just figuring out how to coordinate for the trip, Aiko replied easily. Ren and Kaito are obviously inseparable, so I thought I'd tag along too. Hana raised an eyebrow, her green eyes flicking to Kaito. So you guys are planning to stick together? That's the idea, Ren said smoothly. But it's 4 to a group. You in? Hana hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Sure, why not? Perfect, Aiko said brightly. That makes it easier to plan around you guys. My group can sync up our activities with yours. Ren tilted his head, intrigued. Your group? Aiko nodded. Yeah, I've already got Mei and Haruki, but if we coordinate our schedules, we can all hang out during the free periods or evening events. Kaito noticed a flicker of something in Ren's expression, an almost imperceptible smirk, as he chimed in. That's a genius idea. Hana, you and Kaito can be in charge of organizing our group activities. Kaito frowned slightly, catching the deliberate tone in Ren's words. Was he trying to push him and Hana together? The thought made his chest tighten, especially as he glanced at Aiko, who seemed genuinely excited about the plan. That could work, Kaito said, surprising even himself. He glanced at Aiko, who gave him an encouraging smile. Of course it could, Aiko said, her tone confident. That way we all get to hang out, no matter what. Hana's gaze shifted between Aiko and Kaito, her expression unreadable. Sounds like you've got everything figured out. Teamwork makes the dream work, Ren said with a dramatic flourish, clearly pleased with how things were coming together. We'll dominate those mountain challenges together. Everyone else will be jealous. Aiko laughed. You're acting like it's a competition. Everything's a competition if you try hard enough, Ren quipped. Kaito caught the way Ren's eyes darted between him and Aiko, his grin almost too knowing. It wasn't the first time Ren had inserted himself into situations like this, but now Kaito was acutely aware of his friend's meddling. Ren's subtle nudges, mentioning Kaito and Hana organizing the group, encouraging Aiko to stick close, weren't accidental. Still, Kaito said nothing, choosing instead to go along with the plan. A part of him wondered if Ren's interference was more obvious to the others, but if it was, neither Aiko nor Hana showed it. Hana's smile softened slightly. It'll be nice to do something together. It's been a while since we've all been on the same page. Aiko tilted her head, her expression playful but curious. Well, I'm sure we'll make plenty of memories. Right, Kaito? Kaito nodded, though the undercurrent of tension between Aiko and Hana wasn't lost on him. As the conversation shifted to lighter topics, he couldn't shake the feeling that the trip might be more complicated than he'd originally thought. The final bell rang, and the classroom buzzed with the usual chatter of students eager to head home. Kaito packed his bag slowly, his thoughts preoccupied with the upcoming class trip. He slid his sketchbook into his bag and slung it over his shoulder, his movements uncharacteristically sluggish. Ren, who had been waiting by the door, leaned casually against the frame, tossing a basketball from hand to hand. "You've been zoning out all day," he said, raising an eyebrow. "What's going on, man? You've got that far-off Kaito special look again." Kaito sighed, adjusting the strap of his bag. "I've just been thinking about the trip." "Oh?" Ren's grin widened mischievously. "And by the trip, you mean Aiko, right?" Kaito froze mid-step, his face heating up. "It's not like that." Ren laughed, clapping Kaito on the back. "Dude, come on. I've known you since we were kids. You think I can't tell when you've got someone on your mind?" Kaito mumbled something unintelligible and stared at the floor. Ren stepped in front of him, blocking his path with a knowing smirk. "Let me guess. You're wondering how to spend more time with her without making it obvious. Am I right?" Kaito groaned, his shoulders slumping. "Why do I even bother trying to hide anything from you?" "Because you're bad at it," Ren said, still grinning. "But seriously, you like her, don't you?" Kaito hesitated, his mind flashing with images of Aiko's bright smile and the way she brought energy into every conversation. Yeah, I think I do." Ren nodded knowingly. "Makes sense. She's fun, she gets you to lighten up, and let's face it, she's got that whole whirlwind energy thing that keeps you on your toes. So what's the problem?" "It's not that simple," Kaito muttered. "I don't want to mess things up." Ren crossed his arms, his expression softening. "Look, man, I get it. You've never had a girlfriend before. And after the whole thing with Hana—" "Don't bring that up," Kaito cut in, his voice sharp. The memory of his confession to Hana and the sting of her rejection were still too fresh. Okay, Ren said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "But my point stands. You've always overthought this stuff. Aiko isn't Hana, and she's not expecting you to be perfect. Just be yourself." Kaito shook his head. "What if I ruin things? She's the first person in a long time who's made me feel like I matter. What if I scare her off?" Ren sighed, tossing the basketball into the air and catching it again. "You're giving her way too much credit. You know that? She's not some unreachable goddess. She's just Aiko, a girl who likes hanging out with you and makes you laugh. You think she's going to run for the hills because you're a little awkward?" Kaito frowned, unsure how to respond. Ren placed a hand on his shoulder, his grin returning. "Look, if you're too chicken to figure this out on your own, I'll help you. Call it best friend duty." "Help me?" Kaito asked warily. "Yeah," Ren said, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "I'll make sure you and Aiko get some quality time during the trip. Consider it my personal mission to keep you from dying alone." Kaito rolled his eyes. "Thanks for the vote of confidence." "Hey, someone's got to push you out of your comfort zone," Ren said with a laugh. Before Kaito could argue, a familiar voice rang out from behind them. "Hey, Kaito!" "Ren!" They turned to see Aiko jogging toward them, her pink ponytail bouncing as she waved. She slowed to a stop in front of them, her bright blue eyes sparkling with her usual enthusiasm. "What's up?" she asked, slightly out of breath. "You guys heading out?" Ren grinned, stepping aside to let her into the conversation. "We were just talking about the trip." "Yeah?" Aiko said, tilting her head curiously. "What about it?" "Kaito here was debating how he's going to make the most of it," Ren said smoothly. "You know, since it's his big chance to relax and have some fun." Kaito shot Ren a glare, his ears burning. "That's not what I said." Aiko laughed, the sound bright and infectious. "Well, if that's the case, I'll make sure you have fun, Kaito. Consider it my duty." "See?" Ren said, elbowing Kaito. "She's on board." "Don't encourage him," Kaito muttered, though a faint smile tugged at his lips. Aiko grinned. "Anyway, mind if I walk with you guys? I could use the company." "Absolutely," Ren said before Kaito could answer. "Let's go." As they walked out of the school gates, Ren hung back slightly, watching Kaito and Aiko with a grin that suggested he was already planning something. Kaito, meanwhile, found himself glancing at Aiko more often than he intended, his chest tightening with a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. Whatever the trip held, he knew one thing for sure. He wanted to spend as much of it with her as he could. And with Ren meddling in the background, he had a feeling it was going to be an unforgettable experience. The trio walked down the familiar streets, the fading afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement. Aiko hummed softly to herself, occasionally breaking into playful commentary about random sights along the way. Kaito kept pace beside her, while Ren strolled just behind, tossing his basketball lazily from hand to hand. "So, Aiko," Ren said after a stretch of silence, his tone casual but teasing. "What's your big plan for the trip? You're always full of surprises." Aiko tilted her head thoughtfully. I haven't thought that far ahead. I'll probably just go with the flow. That's more fun, don't you think?" "That's code for chaos," Ren replied with a grin. "Hey," Aiko protested, laughing. "I'll have you know I'm perfectly capable of planning when I need to." "Sure," Ren said, clearly unconvinced. "What about you, Kaito? Any big plans?" Kaito shrugged, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Not really. I guess just hanging out with you guys." Aiko's expression softened. "That sounds nice. Honestly, I'm looking forward to spending time with everyone. It feels like it's been a while since we've done something fun together." Ren raised an eyebrow, his grin widening. "Everyone, huh? Or just a certain someone?" "Ren?" Kaito groaned, his face heating up. Aiko blinked in mock innocence. "What do you mean, Ren? Who's a certain someone?" Ren smirked. "Oh, no one. Just making an observation." Aiko tilted her head, her blue eyes sparkling with mischief. Well, I guess I'll just have to keep you guessing." Kaito shot Ren a pleading look, but his best friend only winked at him in return. Aiko didn't seem to notice the silent exchange, instead skipping a few steps ahead and turning to face them, walking backward. "Actually," she said, her tone more serious, "I did want to ask you guys something." Ren arched an eyebrow. "What's up?" "Well," Aiko hesitated for a moment, her usual confidence faltering slightly. "Do you think, is there anyone in our class who doesn't like me?" The question caught both boys off guard. Kaito stopped in his tracks, his brows furrowing. "Why would you ask that?" Aiko gave a small shrug, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I don't know. Sometimes I get the feeling that not everyone's as happy to have me around as they seem." Ren exchanged a quick glance with Kaito, his teasing demeanor replaced with genuine concern. "You're kidding, right? People love you, Aiko. You're like a walking ball of sunshine." "Yeah," Kaito added quietly, his voice steady. "I don't think anyone dislikes you." Aiko's smile wavered, and for a split second something unreadable flickered across her face. "Thanks," she said softly. "I guess I was just overthinking." Kaito watched her carefully, sensing there was more she wasn't saying. But before he could press further, Aiko clapped her hands together, her usual energy returning. "Anyway, enough about that. Let's focus on the trip. I heard there's supposed to be a stargazing activity one night. Maybe we can all go together?" "Sounds like a plan," Ren said, stepping in to lighten the mood. "But only if Kaito promises not to spend the whole time sketching constellations." Kaito rolled his eyes. "I don't even do that." Yet Ren shot back, laughing. Aiko giggled, and just like that, the tension dissolved into easy conversation once more. Still, as they continued their walk, Kaito couldn't shake the feeling that there was something Aiko wasn't telling them. The evening sky was painted in soft shades of pink and gold as Hana made her way home, her golden hair catching the last rays of sunlight. Her bag hung loosely in her hand, her thoughts swirling in a tangled mess she couldn't seem to sort out. The image of Kaito and Aiko walking together earlier that day was etched firmly in her mind, refusing to fade. Ever since the announcement of the class trip, a strange unease had taken root in Hana's chest. It wasn't the trip itself. She loved those kinds of adventures, a chance to create memories with friends. But the thought of Kaito spending most of the trip with Aiko gnawed at her in a way she couldn't ignore. Her pace slowed as she approached a quiet park near her neighborhood. The sound of children's laughter and birdsong drifted through the air, a stark contrast to the storm inside her. She sank onto an empty bench, her gaze fixed on the kids playing in the distance. "What's wrong with me?" she muttered, her voice barely audible. Hana had always been confident in her connection with Kaito. Years of shared memories and an unspoken understanding had formed a bond she thought was unshakable. But since the day he had confessed his feelings and the moment she rejected him, that bond had started to feel fragile, as if cracks were forming beneath the surface. Now, every time she saw him with Aiko, something tightened in her chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name. "She's just something new," Hana murmured, trying to reassure herself. "That's all it is. Kaito's just intrigued." But deep down, she wasn't convinced. Aiko wasn't just new, she was vibrant, unpredictable, and undeniably magnetic. Hana could see the way Kaito's world seemed brighter around her, how he smiled more freely and laughed with a kind of ease that Hana wasn't sure she'd ever inspired in him. A pang of regret struck her as she thought back to the day of his confession. "I don't feel the same way." The words had come so easily then, spoken with the intent of preserving their friendship. At the time, it had seemed like the right decision. But now, those same words felt like a wall she'd built between them, one she wasn't sure how to tear down. She couldn't help but wonder, had she said them out of honesty or out of fear? Fear of how much Kaito meant to her, and of the mess that might come with facing those feelings. But now, with Aiko in the picture, Hana couldn't shake the sense that time was slipping away. If she didn't do something soon, Kaito might slip away entirely. Clenching her fists, Hana straightened her back, a spark of resolve igniting within her. "I have to fix this," she whispered to herself. "I need to remind him of what we have." The trip would be her chance. She would find a way to spend more time with Kaito, to show him that their bond still mattered, even if it wasn't romantic yet. And if Aiko happened to get in the way, well, Hana wasn't going to let her take Kaito's attention without a fight. Standing up, Hana's expression hardened with determination. She didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing was certain, she wasn't ready to lose Kaito, not to Aiko or anyone else. Whatever it took, she would remind him of where he truly belonged. The courtyard buzzed with excitement as students shuffled between buses, chatting loudly and waving to friends. The air was electric with the promise of adventure, the perfect backdrop for the start of their field trip. Kaito adjusted his bag strap and scanned the crowd, his gaze landing on Ren, who was leaning casually against a lamppost with his arms crossed. "You're looking for her, aren't you?" Ren teased, smirking. "I'm just making sure we're all here," Kaito replied, though his dark eyes betrayed his impatience. "It's almost time to leave." "Relax, man. Aiko knows how to find us," Ren said, pushing off the lamppost. "She's probably late because she had to pack her entire fridge into her bag. Or she's just talking to her classmates," May chimed in as she approached with Hana, her confident stride matching her tone. "You know, people besides you." Kaito sighed, ignoring the jab. Hana stood quietly beside May, her golden hair catching the sunlight. She seemed unusually tense, her green eyes flicking toward Kaito before quickly looking away. "There she is," Ren called, nodding toward the entrance. Aiko came jogging up, her pink ponytail bouncing as usual. She waved, her cheerful energy cutting through the noise around them. Behind her were her three classmates, Karen, Takeshi, and Rika, all chatting animatedly as they trailed behind. "Sorry I'm late," Aiko said, stopping in front of Kaito and Ren. "I got caught up helping Karen with her bag." "Figures," Ren said with a grin. "We were starting to think you bailed on us." "Not a chance," Aiko replied, then turned to Kaito. "So are we all set?" Kaito hesitated, his expression clouding. "Not exactly. What's wrong?" Aiko asked, tilting her head. "We're not on the same bus," Kaito said, the frustration evident in his tone. "Since we're in different classes." Aiko blinked, then laughed lightly. "Oh, is that all? It's fine, Kaito. It's not like we won't see each other when we get there." "But," Kaito started, only for Ren to cut him off. "What's the big deal?" Ren teased, leaning in. "Worried she'll sit with another guy? Maybe Tashi?" Kaito shot him a glare. "That's not it." Aiko, catching on to the banter, grinned. "I mean, Takeshi is fun to talk to. But don't worry, Kaito. I'll save all the best stories for you." Hana frowned slightly, stepping forward. "It's not that far of a drive. Everyone will be fine." Kaito sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I just thought we'd all be together, that's all. Don't worry about it. Aiko said, her tone softening. We'll have plenty of time once we're there. Besides, you'll have Ren to keep you company. And May, Ren added. She'll make sure I don't drag you into too much trouble. Kaito smirked faintly despite himself. Great. See? Aiko said brightly. It'll be fine. Just try not to miss me too much. Kaito rolled his eyes, but the corners of his mouth lifted into a small smile. Aiko's ability to diffuse his frustration never failed to surprise him. Okay, everyone, time to board, one of the teachers called, waving a clipboard. Aiko turned to her classmates. Looks like that's us. See you guys there. As she walked away with Karin, Takeshi, and Rika, Kaito watched her go, the knot in his chest loosening slightly. Ren nudged him, grinning. Cheer up, lover boy. You'll get your chance. Kaito shook his head but didn't reply. Hana, standing beside him, glanced his way, her expression unreadable. Come on, May said, clapping her hands. Our bus isn't going to wait. As the group boarded their bus, Kaito took one last look at Aiko before stepping inside, her laughter fading into the hum of the courtyard. The line to board the bus moved slowly, filled with the chatter of students jockeying for prime window seats and shouting across rows to their friends. Kaito adjusted the strap of his bag, glancing at Ren, who was busy teasing May about the size of her duffel bag. Seriously, May, are you planning to move in or something? Ren joked, lifting the bag with exaggerated effort. What do you even have in here? Unlike you, I come prepared, May shot back, rolling her eyes. Not everyone can survive on a bag of chips and soda. Kaito shook his head, amused by their back and forth. As they stepped onto the bus, Ren turned to him with his usual grin. Where are we sitting? Anywhere in the back is fine, Kaito said, scanning the rows. But before Kaito could claim a seat, May grabbed Ren's arm and tugged him toward an open pair of seats near the middle. You're sitting with me. No arguments. What? Ren protested, looking back at Kaito with a mock horrified expression. Traitor! You'll live, May said, pushing him into the seat and sitting down beside him. Kaito sighed, his plans for a peaceful ride with Ren dashed. He glanced around, noticing Hana standing behind him in the aisle, her gaze expectant. There's an open seat over there, she said, nodding toward the back. Kaito hesitated, but the line behind them was growing impatient. Sure, he muttered, moving toward the seat Hana had pointed out. As they sat down, Hana placed her bag neatly under her seat and gave him a faint smile. Guess it's just us, huh? Yeah, Kaito said, leaning back and gazing out the window. He wasn't sure how he felt about this arrangement. Things with Hana had been complicated lately, and the idea of spending the next hour in close quarters with her made him uneasy. Hana seemed to sense his discomfort. She cleared her throat, her tone light as she tried to break the silence. It's been a while since we've done something like this. Remember those school trips in middle school? You and Ren always ended up causing some kind of trouble. Kaito chuckled softly, the memory pulling a faint smile to his lips. Yeah, I think we got banned from snacks for a week after that incident with the vending machine. Hana laughed, her green eyes warming with nostalgia. I had to smuggle chips to you guys during lunch. You owe me for that, you know. I'll pay you back someday, Kaito said, his voice softer now. For a moment, the tension eased, and Hana seemed to relax. But as the bus began to move, she shifted in her seat, her expression growing more thoughtful. Kaito, she said hesitantly, her voice quieter now. Do you think things between us will ever go back to the way they were? The question caught him off guard. He turned to look at her, unsure of how to respond. I don't know, he admitted. Things change. Hana nodded, her gaze dropping to her hands. Yeah, I guess they do. The conversation faded into silence, the hum of the bus engine filling the space between them. Kaito leaned against the window, his thoughts drifting. He wasn't sure what Hana wanted from him anymore, and he wasn't sure he could give it. As the ride continued, Hana shifted closer, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. Kaito stiffened at first, unsure of what to do, but her breathing slowed and he realized she had fallen asleep. He glanced down at her, noting the peaceful expression on her face. For a moment, he felt a pang of guilt. Hana was trying, in her own way, to bridge the gap between them. But could he ever see her the same way again? Ren's voice from a few rows ahead snapped him out of his thoughts. Hey, Kaito! Don't get too cozy back there. Kaito rolled his eyes but didn't reply, letting Hana sleep as the bus rumbled on toward their destination. The bus came to a halt in the gravel lot, surrounded by towering trees and the glimmer of a lake in the distance. Students poured out, stretching their legs and excitedly regrouping. Kaito stepped off the bus, rolling his stiff shoulder, the one that had borne the weight of Hana's unintentional nap, and took in the picturesque scene. "This place is beautiful," Hana said beside him, her green eyes lighting up as they swept over the sparkling lake and dense forest. "Yeah," Kaito replied absently, his eyes scanning the crowd. His pulse quickened at the thought of seeing Aiko again. Ren, as usual, caught on to his thoughts. "You're not even trying to hide it, dude," he teased, elbowing Kaito with a knowing grin. Before Kaito could respond, Aiko's cheerful voice rang out, cutting through the noise. "Kaito! Ren! Over here!" Kaito turned instantly, spotting Aiko waving enthusiastically from across the lot. Her pink ponytail bounced in the sunlight, her energy a beacon in the chaotic crowd. She stood with her classmates, Takeshi, the confident athlete, Karen, who practically radiated bubbly excitement, and Rika, calm and observant. "There she is," Ren said, nudging Kaito. "Let's go." As they approached, Kaito's stomach twisted at the sight of Takeshi standing just a little too close to Aiko, making her laugh at something he'd said. That laugh, so bright and genuine, only fueled Kaito's irritation. "Great!" Kaito muttered under his breath, his mood souring. When they reached the group, Aiko greeted them with her trademark enthusiasm. "You made it! Isn't this place amazing?" "It's nice," Kaito said, though his eyes flickered briefly to Takeshi. "Aiko's told us all about you guys," Takeshi said, stepping forward with a confident grin. "Especially you, Kaito." Kaito stiffened. "Really?" "All good things, I promise," Takeshi replied, extending a hand. Kaito shook it, his grip firm. "Nice to meet you." Karen bounced on her toes, introducing herself and Rika, who offered a polite nod. Ren, seizing the moment, turned on his charm. "Nice to meet you, Karen, Rika. I'm Ren, Kaito's cooler, better-looking best friend." Karen giggled, and even Rika's lips twitched in amusement. Meanwhile, Hana hung back slightly, her expression guarded as she watched the interaction unfold. "So," Aiko said, clapping her hands, "what's the plan? Are we sticking to our groups or teaming up?" Kaito frowned. "Are we even allowed to mix groups?" Rika spoke up softly. "The teacher said we need to stay in class groups for the activities, but there's free time later." Before anyone could say more, a teacher stepped forward with a stack of papers. "All right, everyone, listen up. Each group will receive a scavenger hunt form. This will be your first activity, so make sure to work together." Aiko turned to her group, her excitement barely contained. "We should team up with Kaito and Ren. It'll be way more fun." Karen nodded eagerly. "Yes, let's do it." Rika hesitated but eventually agreed. That could work. Takeshi shrugged with a grin. "Sure, why not?" Ren smirked, leaning toward Kaito. "Looks like you're stuck with them." "Fine by me," Kaito said, though his tone held a trace of annoyance as Takeshi moved closer to Aiko. With their scavenger hunt forms in hand, the newly merged group began brainstorming strategies. Aiko, her energy contagious, took charge. "Let's meet by the trail entrance in 10 minutes and make this fun." As the group dispersed to prepare, Aiko sidled up to Kaito. Her expression softened, her blue eyes meeting his. "You're not still mad about the bus thing, are you?" Kaito hesitated, his gaze flicking briefly to Takeshi before returning to her. "It's fine. I'm here now." "Good," Aiko said softly, her smile genuine. Ren, never one to miss a chance to stir the pot, leaned in. "You sure you're okay? Or are you worried about someone stealing your thunder?" Kaito shot him a glare. "Not now." Nearby, Hana observed the exchange with quiet frustration. "Let's just start the scavenger hunt," she said, her voice firm as she took the lead toward the trail. As the group followed, Kaito couldn't shake the feeling that this trip was shaping up to be far more complicated than he had anticipated. The class gathered in the clearing near the edge of the forest, where the teacher stood at the front, explaining the rules of the scavenger hunt. The air buzzed with excitement. Students huddled in small groups, some strategizing while others joked and laughed, eager to get started. "All right," Takeshi said with a confident clap of his hands as their two groups came together. "Listen up, people. We're going to win this thing." "Big talk," Ren replied, lazily flipping a twig between his hands. "You got any actual plans, or are you just going to flex and hope for the best?" Takeshi smirked. "Flexing works pretty well for me." Aiko chuckled, shaking her head. Maybe we should let Kaito lead. He's the responsible one here. Kaito blinked, caught off guard by the sudden attention. Splitting up would probably make the most sense. That way we can cover more ground. Logical, Aiko said, nodding approvingly. See? That's why I trust him. Hana, who had been standing a little closer to Kaito, quickly chimed in. We've worked well together before. I'll team up with Kaito. Aiko raised an eyebrow, her smile tightening slightly. Are you sure? I thought Kaito and I made a pretty good team earlier. Hana's tone stayed polite, but there was a sharpness to her words. We have years of experience working together. I know how he thinks. The brewing tension between them was impossible to ignore, and Ren, ever the peacemaker, stepped in with a mischievous grin. Let's keep this simple. Why not let Kaito decide? Kaito froze, his stomach knotting as both girls turned their expectant gazes on him. The weight of their anticipation felt suffocating, but before he could stammer out a response, Takeshi stepped in with a reassuring pat on Kaito's shoulder. Relax, man, Takeshi said. You can team up with Aiko. I'll stick with Hana. Hana shot Takeshi a sharp look, her displeasure evident, but she sighed and nodded reluctantly. Fine. Let's just get started. With the teams decided, the group split off, scattering into the forest in search of scavenger hunt items. As Kaito walked alongside Aiko, her cheerful chatter filling the quiet spaces between them, he couldn't help but feel a mixture of relief and apprehension. This was going to be a long day. The tension between Hana and Takeshi was palpable as they made their way through the woods. Despite his natural athleticism, Takeshi seemed more interested in casual conversation than actually searching for scavenger hunt items. Shouldn't we be looking for the next clue? Hana asked sharply, crouching to inspect a patch of moss near a tree. We'll get to it, Takeshi replied breezily, leaning back against a tree trunk. No rush. This is supposed to be fun. Hana straightened, brushing dirt from her hands with a frustrated huff. It's not about fun. It's about winning. Right, Takeshi said, a smirk tugging at his lips. Because winning is definitely going to fix whatever's bothering you. Hana froze, her green eyes narrowing as she turned to face him. What are you talking about? Takeshi stepped forward, his voice dropping to a lower, more serious tone. You've been tense since we started this. Is this about Kaito? Hana's lips parted, but no words came out. Her eyes flickered briefly with a mix of surprise and indignation, but she quickly turned her gaze away. Takeshi chuckled softly, his expression softening just enough to temper his usual cockiness. I don't know why you're fighting it. If you care about him, just admit it. Hana turned away, her jaw tightening as she clenched her fists. I don't need advice from you. Fair enough, Takeshi said with a shrug, his tone light but edged with meaning. But don't wait too long. You might not like what happens if you do. Hana stood still for a moment, her back to him, before taking a deep breath and continuing forward. Tashi followed at a leisurely pace, his earlier smirk fading into an expression of quiet observation. Though he said nothing more, his words lingered in the air between them, unspoken truths hanging heavily over the silence. Deeper in the forest, Kaito and Aiko moved effortlessly together. They'd already found 2 scavenger hunt items, their teamwork smooth and unspoken. The air between them felt light, punctuated by playful banter as they navigated the dense trees. So, Aiko said, leaning closer to peer at the list in Kaito's hand, her pink ponytail brushing against his arm. What's next? A feather from a bird, Kaito replied, scanning the area. Shouldn't be too hard. Unless the birds are in hiding, Aiko quipped, her grin mischievous. Guess I'll just have to charm them out of the trees. Kaito chuckled despite himself. Good luck with that. As they continued their search, the usual brightness in Aiko's demeanor dimmed for a moment. She hesitated, her steps slowing slightly before she glanced sideways at Kaito. Hey, do you ever feel like you're running out of time to do things that matter? Kaito stopped walking, his brows furrowing as he turned to face her. What do you mean? Like, Aiko trailed off, her gaze flicking toward the canopy above them. What if you try so hard to make memories, but in the end, they don't stick? Like they're just gone? Her voice was quieter now, a vulnerability seeping through her words that caught Kaito off guard. That's not like you, he said, studying her closely. Aiko gave him a faint smile, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Sorry, just a random thought. Forget I said anything. Kaito opened his mouth to respond, but before he could press further, a familiar voice broke through the trees, pulling them both from the moment. Find anything good? Teishi's voice echoed, accompanied by the sound of footsteps. Kaito and Aiko turned to see Takeshi and Hana approaching, Takeshi waving cheerfully. Hana's expression was more reserved, her green eyes flicking between Kaito and Aiko. Working on it? Kaito replied curtly, his earlier ease replaced by a trace of irritation. Keep it up, Takeshi said with a grin that bordered on smug. Wouldn't want to embarrass yourself in front of Aiko. Kaito's jaw tightened, his hands clenching at his sides, but before the tension could escalate, Aiko laughed lightly, the sound breaking the unease. Come on, she said, tugging gently on Kaito's sleeve. Let's get back to work. Kaito let out a quiet breath, nodding as Aiko led him deeper into the forest, her earlier vulnerability still lingering in the back of his mind. The sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the forest in a warm golden glow as groups trickled back to the clearing. Kaito's group arrived to find Ren lounging smugly near a tree, his arms loaded with snacks, casually munching on a bag of chips. What took you so long? Ren called, tossing a chip into his mouth with exaggerated flair. I was starting to think you got lost. Not all of us sit around eating while others do the work, Hana muttered as she brushed past him, her tone sharp. Ren smirked, entirely unfazed. Someone's cranky. Did you lose, or are you just mad? Kaito didn't let you lead? Hana shot him a glare but didn't respond, instead focusing on sorting through their scavenger hunt results. Kaito, standing a few feet away, glanced around the clearing and spotted Aiko nearby. She sat on the grass with Karen and Rika, her pink ponytail catching the last rays of sunlight as she gestured animatedly. Her laughter rang out, light and carefree, drawing attention from those around her. For a moment, Kaito couldn't look away. It wasn't just her brightness or the way she seemed to pull people into her orbit. It was the memory of her earlier vulnerability, the small crack in her usual confidence. She had opened up to him, even if only briefly, and he hadn't pushed further. Should he have? Was she waiting for him to? Kaito, are you even listening? Hana's voice broke through his thoughts. Yeah, he said quickly, turning toward her. Hana raised an eyebrow but let it go, her tone softening. You should stay focused. We're not done yet. Kaito nodded, though his gaze flickered back to Aiko. She caught his eyes for a brief moment, offering him a small, warm smile before turning her attention back to Karen and Rika. The knot of questions in his chest tightened further, leaving him uncertain. Ren clapped him on the back, breaking the silence and tension. Come on, man. Don't let a little scavenger hunting make you overthink. Kaito sighed, adjusting the strap of his bag. Since when do you care about overthinking? Ren grinned. Since I saw you staring like a lost puppy. Don't think I didn't notice. Kaito groaned, rubbing the back of his neck. Can we not do this right now? Hey, I'm just saying, Ren said with a shrug. You've got options. Maybe you should actually do something about them. Options? Hana interjected sharply, stepping closer, her tone laced with irritation. Ren's grin widened as he glanced at her. Nothing. Just giving Kaito some friendly advice. Before Hana could press further, the teachers began calling for everyone to gather, signaling the start of the next activity. The group began shuffling toward the center of the clearing, but Kaito's mind remained scattered, his thoughts torn between the momentary glances, lingering feelings, and the quiet uncertainty of what came next. As the students settled into their respective groups, one of the teachers stepped forward, clipboard in hand. All right, everyone. Great job with the scavenger hunt today. We'll tally the results and announce the winning group later tonight during the campfire. A wave of excitement rippled through the crowd, murmurs of anticipation spreading among the students. A campfire? Karen said, her eyes lighting up. That sounds fun. I haven't been to a campfire in years, Aiko said, clapping her hands together. S'mores, stories, and stars? Count me in. Wait, Takeshi interjected, raising an eyebrow. Does that mean we're camping out here tonight? Relax, Rika said with a calm smile. We're heading back to the lodging area after dinner. Ren leaned toward Kaito, nudging him with his elbow. A campfire, huh? Perfect opportunity for you to make your move. Kaito let out a tired sigh. Can you not? Not what? Try to help you out? Ren grinned. Come on, you're practically being handed the perfect moment here. As the groups began dispersing to prepare for dinner, Hana stepped closer to Kaito, lightly grabbing his arm. Walk with me? Kaito hesitated, his gaze flicking briefly to Aiko, who was animatedly chatting with Karen and Takeshi. She didn't seem to notice the exchange, her laughter carrying lightly on the breeze. Sure, Kaito said, nodding as he turned to Hana. The two began walking together toward the trail leading to the dining area, a quiet tension settling between them. In the fading sunlight, the glow of the approaching evening added an air of calm to the otherwise busy camp. Yet, Kaito couldn't help but wonder what Hana wanted to talk about, and why her voice had carried a note of urgency. The two walked in silence, the distant hum of chatter and the rustle of the forest filling the quiet space between them. Hana eventually broke the silence, her voice softer than Kaito was used to hearing. Kaito, she began, her gaze fixed straight ahead. Are you happy? The question stopped Kaito in his tracks for a moment. What do you mean? You've been different lately, Hana continued, her pace slowing as she finally turned to face him. It's like you're not the same Kaito I used to know. Kaito frowned, caught off guard by her observation. People change, Hana. Isn't that normal? I guess, she said, her teeth grazing her bottom lip. But I don't want us to change too much. I mean, we've always been close, right? Kaito glanced at her, taking in the subtle worry etched into her features. We're still close, he said after a pause, though the words carried an unexpected weight. Hana nodded, but her fingers gripped the strap of her bag tightly, betraying her unease. Good, because I don't want to lose you. Kaito opened his mouth to respond, but found himself at a loss for words. Instead, he let the silence settle again, unsure of how to bridge the growing gap between them. When they rejoined the group near the dining area, the air felt heavier, though neither of them said a word about the conversation. As Kaito's gaze wandered, it landed instinctively on Aiko. She was laughing with Karen and Rika, her energy as magnetic as ever, and for a moment, Kaito felt a pang of guilt for how his thoughts kept circling back to her. The growing tension between Hana, Aiko, and the shifting dynamics of the people around him loomed in his mind, a quiet storm he couldn't ignore. Whatever this trip held, Kaito knew one thing for certain: it wasn't going to be simple. After dinner, the groups began to scatter, some drifting toward the lake while others lingered near the dining area, chatting under the fading light of the evening. The sky deepened into shades of twilight, the horizon tinged with soft oranges and purples. Kaito's gaze naturally sought out Aiko, and it didn't take long to spot her. Her pink ponytail stood out against the growing darkness, catching the soft glow of the setting sun. She was standing at the edge of the group with Karen and Rika, laughing at something Takeshi had said. Kaito's chest tightened. It wasn't that he disliked Takeshi, but the guy had a way of commanding attention effortlessly, and right now, Aiko's. Ren strolled up beside Kaito, following his line of sight. You're staring again, dude. Careful, or she's going to think you're plotting something. I'm not staring, Kaito muttered, shoving his hands into his pockets. Right, Ren said, his tone dripping with amusement. Anyway, what's the plan? You just going to stand here and glare at Takeshi all night, or are you actually going to do something? I'm not glaring, Kaito said, frowning. You kind of are, Ren replied with a smirk. Look, I get it. Takeshi's got the whole confident athlete thing going for him, but don't let that get to you. Aiko already likes spending time with you. Use that? Kaito sighed, his thoughts tangling. Ren wasn't wrong. Aiko had always been easygoing and comfortable around him. But seeing her so animated and engaged in Takeshi's conversation made him hesitate. Ren nudged him lightly. You know, the more you stand here overthinking, the more time Takeshi gets to make her laugh. Just saying. Kaito's jaw tightened. He knew Ren was trying to push him into action, but the fear of misstepping still gnawed at him. Yet, as he watched Aiko, her bright laughter cutting through the twilight, he realized he didn't want to spend the rest of the evening on the sidelines. Taking a steadying breath, he turned to Ren. Fine, but if this goes badly, it's on you. Ren grinned, clapping him on the back. That's the spirit, lover boy. Go get her. Kaito shook his head, nerves swirling in his chest, but he started toward Aiko anyway. It was time to stop holding back. Summoning his courage, Kaito walked toward Aiko's group, Ren trailing behind with an amused grin. As Kaito approached, Aiko was the first to notice him. Her eyes lit up, and she waved enthusiastically. Kaito! There you are, she said, her cheerful voice cutting through the growing night. Hey, Kaito replied, keeping his voice steady despite the nervous flutter in his chest. Takeshi turned to him, his trademark grin widening. Kaito, good timing. We were just debating who'd win in a relay race across the field. Think you could keep up with me? Kaito ignored the comment, focusing solely on Aiko. I was wondering if you wanted to check out the lake. It looks nice at night. Aiko blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the direct invitation. Before she could answer, Takeshi cut in with a laugh. The lake? Come on, Kaito, the campfire's where it's at. Everyone's going to be there, Takeshi said, his tone easy but with an underlying challenge. Kaito's jaw tightened, frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. Maybe not everyone wants to follow the crowd. Aiko's eyes flickered between Kaito and Takeshi, clearly sensing the tension. Beside her, Karin and Rika exchanged uncertain looks, unsure whether to intervene. Before things could escalate further, Ren smoothly stepped in, draping an arm over Takeshi's shoulders. Hey, Takeshi, he said, grinning. Why don't we save the relay race for tomorrow? You know, give the rest of us a chance to enjoy the night without you turning everything into a competition. Takeshi chuckled, shrugging Ren's arm off. Fine, but don't back out when the time comes. Ren shot Kaito a quick look, his expression urging him to act now. Kaito took a deep breath, turning back to Aiko. So, what do you think? Aiko hesitated for a moment, glancing toward the campfire where a group of students was beginning to gather. Then she smiled warmly, her eyes meeting Kaito's. The lake does sound nice. Let's go. Relief washed over Kaito, and he nodded. Great. As Aiko stepped away from the group to join him, Takeshi raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. Karin gave Aiko an encouraging thumbs up, while Rika simply smiled faintly. Ren, ever the meddler, grinned as he watched them walk away. Enjoy the view, he called after them, earning an exasperated look from Kaito. But Kaito didn't let it bother him. With Aiko walking beside him, the tension eased, and for the first time that evening, he felt like the night might just go his way. The moon hung low in the sky, its soft light casting a silvery glow across the still surface of the lake. The air was cool and still, save for the faint sounds of laughter and crackling fire drifting from the camp in the distance. Kaito walked a few steps ahead of Aiko, his hands buried deep in his jacket pockets, his thoughts a restless storm. Aiko watched him, her usual spark subdued by the tension she could feel radiating from him. She quickened her pace, stepping in beside him and breaking the silence. You're awfully quiet tonight, she said, her tone light but edged with concern. That's not like you. I'm fine, Kaito replied too quickly, the words clipped and unconvincing. Aiko tilted her head, her sharp blue eyes narrowing as she studied him. No, you're not. I can tell when something's bothering you. Kaito let out a sigh, his shoulders stiffening. It's nothing. Just forget about it. That's not how this works, Aiko said, stepping in front of him to block his path. Her voice was firm but tinged with worry. You've been off since earlier. Did I do something wrong? Her genuine concern made Kaito falter. He glanced away, his gaze dropping to the ground. It's not you. I'm just frustrated. Frustrated, Aiko repeated, her tone softening. With what? Kaito hesitated, his jaw tightening as he wrestled with his emotions. Finally he muttered, Takeshi. Aiko blinked, surprised. Takeshi? What about him? Kaito shifted uncomfortably, his dark eyes flickering with conflict. It's like he's always around you. He's confident, funny, athletic, everything I'm not, and you seem to like it. For a moment, Aiko stared at him in stunned silence. Then, to his surprise, she let out a quiet, incredulous laugh. Kaito, she said, taking a step closer, are you jealous? He froze, the word hitting him like a sudden jolt. I know, I mean. He rubbed the back of his neck, his voice faltering. Maybe, a little. Aiko's expression softened and she closed the small gap between them. Her voice was gentle but unwavering as she said, You're an idiot, you know that? Kaito blinked, startled. What? You think I care about all that stuff? Aiko asked, her gaze steady. Takeshi's fun, sure, but he doesn't see me the way you do. Her words struck a chord deep within him, though doubt still lingered. I don't want to lose you. You're not going to, Aiko said firmly. But Kaito, you've got to stop putting me on some pedestal. I'm not this perfect person you've built up in your head. I'm just me. Kaito looked at her then, truly looked at her, and saw the vulnerability she so rarely let show. It made his chest ache, the weight of his own insecurities pressing heavier against him. I know you're not perfect, he said softly, but you're still important to me. Aiko's faint smile carried a bittersweet warmth. And you're important to me too. So stop worrying, okay? He nodded, though the knot in his chest didn't fully unwind. For a moment they stood under the pale light of the moon, the quiet between them both comforting and charged with unspoken emotions. The space between them felt impossibly vast, and yet achingly close, the weight of their words lingering in the cool night air. When they returned to the campfire, the atmosphere was lively. Students gathered in clusters, their laughter and chatter mingling with the crackling of the flames. The warm glow of the fire danced across their faces, and the smell of toasted marshmallows filled the air. Ren spotted them first, his trademark smirk spreading as they approached. Took you long enough, he teased, tossing a bag of chips toward Kaito. Kaito caught it with ease, but his expression remained distant, his thoughts still swirling with Aiko's words by the lake. Ren's smirk faded slightly as he leaned closer, lowering his voice so only Kaito could hear. Everything okay? Yeah, Kaito replied quickly, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. He wasn't entirely sure if it was true. Ren studied him for a moment, then gave a small shrug, deciding not to press further. Instead, he turned his attention back to the group, cracking a joke that sent a ripple of laughter through their cluster. As the night went on, Kaito found himself unable to fully join in the lively atmosphere. His gaze drifted to Aiko, who was sitting near the fire with Karen and Rika, her face glowing in the flickering light. She laughed at something Karen said, her joy blending seamlessly with the warmth of the evening. Kaito's chest tightened. He wasn't sure what he felt, jealousy, relief, or something even deeper that he couldn't quite name. All he knew was that something had shifted, something that made the night feel heavier and brighter all at once. And it had everything to do with her. The campfire crackled warmly in the center of the clearing, its golden light flickering across the gathered students. The evening air was alive with laughter and the occasional sizzle of marshmallows roasting over the flames. Ren, ever the storyteller, sat cross-legged on a log, gesturing animatedly as he recounted a tale of his supposed basketball glory. And then, Ren declared, his voice rising with drama, I jumped, the buzzer went off, and swish, the ball went right in. Game over. Crowd goes wild. I'm the hero. Karen leaned forward, giggling. No way. That sounds like something straight out of a movie. It's true, Ren said with a grin. Ask Kaito. He was there. Kaito, sitting beside him, smirked faintly. You left out the part where you tripped over your own feet right after the buzzer. The group burst into laughter, and Ren shot Kaito a mock glare. Traitor. Aiko, perched next to Karen on the log, laughed along with the others. Honestly, I can totally see that happening. Ren clutched his chest in mock offense. At 2, Aiko? I thought we had a bond. Hey, I'm just being honest, Aiko replied with a playful grin, sticking her tongue out at him. Across the fire, Hana sat quietly, her green eyes flickering between Kaito and Aiko. Her smile was tight as she watched Aiko lean closer to Kaito, whispering something that made him chuckle softly. So, Aiko, Hana said suddenly, her tone pleasant but carrying a subtle edge. What's your favorite thing about this trip so far? Aiko blinked, momentarily surprised by the question before smiling. Probably getting to explore with everyone. And the scavenger hunt was fun. It was, Hana agreed, though her smile remained stiff. Though it's hard to keep up when some people insist on going at their own pace. Aiko tilted her head, feigning innocence. Oh, you mean Kaito and me? Sorry if we held anyone up. Kaito shifted in his seat, uncomfortable with the tension rising between the two girls. Ren, always quick to diffuse, leaned forward with a half-eaten marshmallow in hand. Hey, at least we found everything on the list, Ren said cheerfully. Team effort, right? Right, Hana replied, her laugh forced. Team effort. Aiko, unfazed, grabbed a marshmallow skewer and held it out to Kaito. Here. You haven't roasted one yet. Kaito hesitated, then accepted it. Thanks. The small exchange, though brief, didn't escape Hana's notice. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her jacket, her gaze lingering on Aiko and Kaito. The lively atmosphere around the campfire carried on, but for Hana, The flame seemed to highlight an unspoken rivalry she couldn't ignore. A few minutes later, Takeshi appeared, a guitar slung over his shoulder and a confident grin on his face. All right, who's ready for some music? The group cheered in unison as Takeshi began strumming a lively tune, his voice carrying effortlessly over the crackling fire. The rhythm pulled more students closer, their attention captivated by his performance. Aiko clapped along enthusiastically, her energy as infectious as ever, and the group joined in, swaying and laughing. Kaito's eyes found Aiko again, her smile bright and unguarded as she laughed at a playful comment Takeshi made mid-song. His chest tightened, not quite with jealousy, but with the weight of seeing Takeshi slip so naturally into the spotlight, while Kaito felt like an outsider watching from the edges. Beside him, Hana shifted closer. You okay? She asked, her voice soft and low enough not to draw attention. Yeah, Kaito replied, though the lack of conviction in his tone betrayed him. You don't have to act like it doesn't bother you, Hana said, her gaze steady. Kaito frowned, turning to her. What do you mean? Hana didn't answer directly. Instead, she nodded toward the group gathered around Takeshi and Aiko. She's hard to ignore, isn't she? Kaito followed her gaze, watching as Aiko laughed and clapped in time with the song. He hesitated before admitting quietly, Yeah. Hana's expression shifted, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her face. Just don't lose yourself, okay? Kaito gave her a puzzled look, but before he could respond, Aiko's voice rang out above the music. Kaito, your turn to sing! The group turned to him, cheering. Ren, never one to miss an opportunity, gave him a shove. Come on, man, show him what you've got. I don't sing, Kaito protested, holding up his hands defensively. That's not an excuse, Aiko teased, her grin playful. Ren said you used to do karaoke all the time. Kaito shot a glare at Ren. Traitor. Ren smirked. Hey, you're better than me. Do it for the team. With a resigned sigh, Kaito stood reluctantly as Takeshi handed him the guitar. The group quieted, all eyes on him. Kaito hesitated, his fingers hovering over the strings, unsure if he could pull this off. Then, to his own surprise, he began to play. The melody was soft and simple, but it carried through the night air, weaving into the crackling of the fire. At first, his voice was quiet, tentative, but as he found his rhythm, it grew steadier, stronger. The group listened intently, even Takeshi nodding along in appreciation. Aiko's gaze never left him, her eyes shining with encouragement. When Kaito finished, the clearing erupted into applause. Aiko beamed at him, her blue eyes alight. That was amazing, Kaito. Takeshi clapped him on the back, his grin wide. Seriously, man, you've got talent. Kaito's face grew warm under the praise, and he mumbled a quiet, thanks. As the night wore on, the lively atmosphere continued, but Kaito couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Aiko's words from the lake lingered in his mind, and Hana's quiet warning echoed alongside them. The campfire cast flickering shadows across the clearing, but it was the shadows in his heart that weighed on him the most, those of feelings unspoken and changes he couldn't quite grasp. As the campfire burned low and the night deepened, the clearing grew quieter, with most students retreating to their tents. Ren stayed behind, leaning casually against a tree at the edge of the clearing, his gaze fixed on the glowing embers. The distant sounds of laughter and rustling tent fabric faded into the background as footsteps approached. You're scheming, aren't you? May's voice broke the silence, sharp and direct. She crossed her arms as she stopped a few feet away, at her expression unreadable. Ren turned toward her, raising his eyebrows with a playful grin. Scheming? Me? Nah, I'm just here for the snacks and the good vibes. May didn't flinch, her sharp gaze unwavering. Cut the act, Ren. I've been watching you. You've been stirring things up all day. What's your angle? Ren leaned back against the tree, his grin softening into something more thoughtful. You make it sound so sinister, May. I'm not some evil mastermind. I'm just helping. Helping who? May asked, narrowing her eyes as she stepped closer. Ren's gaze drifted toward the tents, where the faint sound of muffled laughter carried on the breeze. Kaito, he said simply. May arched an eyebrow. And what exactly are you helping him with? Ren let out a sigh, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, Kaito's not the type to take risks, especially when it comes to putting himself out there. He's a good guy, but he overthinks everything. You've seen him. He broods in silence, hoping things will magically fall into place. Someone has to give him a nudge. And you think meddling is the way to do that? May asked, her tone sharp with skepticism. Ren shrugged. It's not meddling, it's strategy. Think of it like chess. Every move I make is to clear the board so he can make his own play. May frowned, clearly unconvinced. You're playing with people's emotions, Ren. That's a dangerous game. I'm not playing, Ren said, his voice unusually firm. I don't care if Kaito ends up with Aiko or Hana, as long as he's happy. That's the goal. May studied him, her expression softening slightly as she mulled over his words. And what about the people who get hurt along the way? Have you thought about them? Ren's smirk faded, replaced by a more serious expression. This isn't about hurting anyone, but let's not pretend there aren't sides here. Aiko and Kaito have a connection. It's obvious. Hana? She's not ready to let go. And Takeshi? Let's just say he's not exactly cheering for Kaito to succeed. May sighed, her arms dropping to her sides. So what's your grand plan? Ren's grin returned, though it lacked some of its usual mischief. Tomorrow's activities are going to be key. I'll keep Takeshi busy and make sure Hana doesn't stir the pot too much. That'll give Kaito and Aiko the space they need to figure things out on their own. And Hana? May asked cautiously. Ren's grin faltered. Hana's complicated. She's been a part of Kaito's life forever, and she cares about him, no question. But if she lets jealousy take over, she'll only push him further away. That's where you come in. May blinked, surprised. Me? Why me? Because she trusts you, Ren said simply, and you're one of the few people who can talk sense into her. Besides, you don't want Kaito caught in the middle of a mess, do you? May hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. After a long pause, she sighed. Fine, I'll try. But you'd better know what you're doing, Ren. Ren grinned, the spark of confidence returning to his eyes. Don't worry, I've got this. It's all part of the plan. As May turned to leave, Ren lingered by the dying embers of the campfire, his expression growing more serious as he muttered under his breath. One wrong move, though, and this whole thing could blow up in our faces. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, the group reached the midpoint of the day's challenges. The latest activity was a navigation task, requiring groups to use maps and compasses to locate hidden flags spread across the area. The challenge encouraged collaboration, but it also became a battleground for the unspoken agendas brewing among the members. Ren, walking at the back of the group with May, leaned in close. All right, time to make my move, he whispered. May rolled her eyes. You're too invested in this, you know. Ren smirked. Someone has to steer the ship. Otherwise, it's just going to crash and burn. Up ahead, Hana was subtly positioning herself near Kaito, casually holding the map while asking for his input. What do you think, Kaito? She asked, pointing at the route she had planned. Should we head this way first? It's a shortcut. Kaito glanced at the map, but his attention kept drifting toward Aiko, who was walking beside Takeshi. The two were deep in conversation, Aiko gesturing animatedly while Takeshi leaned in slightly, laughing at something she said. The sight tightened a knot in Kaito's chest. Ren noticed his distraction and decided it was time to intervene. Hey, Hana, he called, slipping in between her and Kaito. Why don't you and May tackle that shortcut together? May's great with maps. Hana frowned, catching the faint glimmer of mischief in Ren's eyes. I think Kaito and I can handle it, she said, her tone a little sharper than she intended. May stepped in, her calm voice diffusing the tension. I don't mind splitting up. It might be faster that way. Ren clapped his hands together. Perfect. That means Kaito and I can check out that other path. Aiko and Takeshi, you're good to handle the flag near the clearing, right? Sure thing, Takeshi said easily, while Aiko gave a thumbs up. We'll find it in no time. Kaito's head snapped toward Ren, his confusion barely hidden. Wait, what? Ren leaned closer to Kaito, his voice dropping to a whisper. Trust me, just follow my lead. Before Kaito could protest, Ren began herding everyone to their assigned directions. All right, team, let's move out. The sooner we finish, the sooner we can relax. As they walked down the trail, Ren slowed his pace, letting Kaito and Aiko naturally drift ahead of him. May and Hana had taken the other route as planned, leaving the three of them alone on the wooded path. Aiko glanced over her shoulder, noticing Ren hanging back. You okay back there, Ren? She called. Just giving you two some space, Ren replied with a smirk. Wouldn't want to cramp your style. Aiko laughed, though a faint blush colored her cheeks. Kaito shot Ren a glare, muttering under his breath, "Subtle, as always." Ren waved him off, stepping further back to give them more privacy. Kaito glanced sideways at Aiko, his nerves prickling at the unexpected opportunity to be alone with her. The soft rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of birds filled the silence between them. "So," Aiko began, breaking the quiet, "what's been bothering you? You've seemed distracted." Kaito hesitated, his gaze dropping to the ground. "It's nothing." "Liar," she said lightly, nudging his shoulder. "Come on, you can tell me." Kaito sighed, trying to find the right words. Before he could answer, Ren's voice echoed from behind. "You two lovebirds better hurry up. The clock's ticking." Aiko rolled her eyes, but her smile remained. "Ignore him," she said, her tone softening as she turned her attention back to Kaito. "Seriously, what's going on?" Kaito glanced at her, his heart pounding as he debated whether to open up or brush it off. The weight of her question lingered, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was important. Another piece in the tangled web Ren seemed determined to weave. The forest trail felt quieter than before as Kaito and Aiko walked side by side. The sound of their footsteps crunching softly against the dirt path filled the silence between them. Aiko, as usual, carried the conversation, her voice lively as she recounted something Karen had said earlier. But Kaito wasn't listening. His mind swirled with doubts and insecurities that gnawed at him like an itch he couldn't scratch. "Hey, Kaito," Aiko said suddenly, noticing his silence. "You're really out of it today. What's going on?" Kaito hesitated, glancing at her. He knew he should keep his thoughts to himself, but the question burned too hot in his mind. "Aiko, why are you always so nice to me?" She stopped walking, turning to face him, her expression a mix of confusion and concern. "What kind of question is that?" "I mean, you're nice to everyone," Kaito said, his voice faltering. "You're always so bright, so cheerful, making people laugh. I see the way you are with your classmates, with Ren. It's like you don't need me, like you'd be just as happy hanging out with anyone else." Aiko blinked, her usual smile fading. "Wait, are you saying you think I'm just being nice to you because it's what I do?" "I don't know," Kaito said, his voice rising slightly. "I guess I just don't understand why you'd even bother with someone like me." Her blue eyes widened, and for a moment she said nothing. Then her expression hardened, and she crossed her arms. "Kaito, that's not fair." Kaito flinched at her tone. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean." "No," she interrupted, her voice sharper than he'd ever heard it. "You think I don't care? That I'm just going through the motions with you? You really don't get it, do you?" Her words hit him like a punch to the gut, but before he could respond, she continued, her voice quieter now, but no less firm. "You're always stuck in your head, doubting everything, doubting yourself, and honestly, it's exhausting. I thought you saw me differently." "Aiko," Kaito tried to speak, but she held up a hand, stopping him. "Just forget it, okay?" She turned on her heel, walking ahead without looking back. "I'll see you later, Kaito." He stood there, frozen, guilt and regret twisting in his chest as her figure disappeared down the trail. Back at the main camp, Ren leaned against a tree near the edge of the clearing, flipping a small stick in his hands. Hana paced nearby, her jaw tight and her arms crossed. "This is your fault," she snapped, glaring at him. Ren raised an eyebrow, unfazed by her tone. "What is?" "Whatever just happened between Kaito and Aiko," she said, her voice sharp. "You keep pushing them together like it's some kind of game. It's not helping." Ren tossed the stick aside, his smirk fading. "I'm not pushing them. I'm giving them space to figure it out." "No, you're meddling," Hana said, stepping closer. "And it's only making things worse." Ren straightened, his casual demeanor giving way to something more serious. "You think I'm the problem here?" "Look, Hana, I get that you care about Kaito, but maybe you should take a step back and ask yourself why you're so involved in this." Her green eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You know exactly what it means," Ren said, his voice low but pointed. "You're not just worried about Kaito, you're worried about what happens if he chooses someone else." Hana's breath caught, but she quickly masked it with anger. "That's not true." "Isn't it?" Ren shot back. "You're not mad because I'm meddling. You're mad because you're losing your chance. And instead of owning up to that, you're blaming me." The words hung between them, heavy and sharp. Hana clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms as she looked away. Ren sighed, his tone softening. Look, I'm not trying to hurt anyone. I just want Kaito to be happy. If that's with Aiko, fine. If it's not, that's fine too. But you need to figure out what you want, Hana, before it's too late. He pushed off the tree and walked away, leaving Hana standing alone, her chest tight and her mind racing. Kaito sat by the lake, the setting sun casting golden ripples across the water. He picked up a stone and skipped it across the surface, watching the circles widen and fade. Each ripple felt like a reflection of the argument replaying in his head. Why do I always mess this up? He muttered, gripping another stone. Why can't I just say the right thing? He thought back to Aiko's face, the way her usual brightness had dimmed, the hurt in her eyes. It stung more than he wanted to admit. He hadn't meant to doubt her, but his own insecurities had twisted his thoughts, and now he'd pushed her away. With a sigh, he let the stone fall from his hand and buried his face in his knees. The ache in his chest was all too familiar, and he wondered if he was doomed to keep making the same mistakes. Kaito sat by the lake, his knees drawn up to his chest as the fading sunlight reflected off the water. He gripped a smooth stone in his hand, its cool surface grounding him as his thoughts spiraled. Aiko's voice echoed in his mind, sharp with hurt and disappointment. Why are you always so nice to me? He grimaced, throwing the stone into the lake. It skipped twice before sinking, much like the sinking feeling in his chest. He hated himself for asking her that. He hated himself even more for why he'd asked it. Deep down, Kaito knew why he was upset. It wasn't just about Aiko's sunny personality or the way she made everyone around her feel at ease. It was about the way she made him feel, like he was someone worth talking to, worth laughing with, worth spending time with, and that terrified him. She's just being nice, he muttered to himself. That's all it is. It was the same thought that had gnawed at him during his years of friendship with Hana. He remembered every little moment they'd shared, every smile and laugh that he had misinterpreted, convincing himself it meant something more. And then the confession. Her words still echoed in his mind. You're such a good friend. A bitter laugh escaped his lips. He couldn't go through that again. He couldn't let himself believe there was something more with Aiko, only to find out he was wrong. So he'd asked the question. He'd pushed her away before she could push him first. She probably thinks I'm pathetic, he muttered, rubbing his face with his hands. And she's right. But even as he sat there, wallowing in his own doubt, another part of him whispered, what if you're wrong? What if she actually cares? That thought only made the knot in his chest tighten. If Aiko did care about him, if there was even a chance, then why did she always seem so at ease with everyone else? Why did she laugh so easily with Takeshi, or talk so effortlessly with Ren and Karen? She's just like that with everyone, he said under his breath, trying to convince himself. I'm not special. But the idea that he wasn't special to her, that he was just another friend in her orbit, made his stomach twist. If that was all he was to her, then walking away now was the right choice. It was better than letting himself fall deeper, only to end up hurt again. Kaito let out a heavy sigh and stared out at the lake. The ripples from the stone he'd thrown were gone now, the surface calm and steady. He envied that calm, but he knew it wasn't something he could hold on to. A rustle of leaves behind him snapped Kaito out of his thoughts. He turned to see Ren approaching, his hands shoved into his pockets and his expression unusually serious. Thought I'd find you here, Ren said, sitting down beside him without waiting for an invitation. What do you want? Kaito muttered, looking away. Ren raised an eyebrow. You're really leaning into the brooding artist thing, huh? Kaito shot him a glare, but it lacked real heat. Ren sighed, leaning back on his hands as he looked out at the lake. So, you gonna tell me what's going on, or do I have to guess? Nothing's going on, Kaito said quickly, his tone defensive. Yeah, sure. That's why Aiko stormed off looking like she wanted to punch a tree, Ren said dryly. Seriously, man, what happened? Kaito hesitated, his grip tightening on the edge of his jeans. I don't know, okay? I don't know how to handle her. Ren frowned. What do you mean? She's just... Kaito struggled for the words. She's so bright. She's always laughing, always smiling, always making everyone feel like they matter. And it's not just with me. She's like that with everyone. Ren studied him for a moment before speaking. And you think that means she doesn't care about you? Kaito didn't answer, but the silence was enough of a confirmation. Ren let out a low whistle. Man, you're really messed up over this, huh? I just don't want to make the same mistake, Kaito said quietly, his voice barely audible. I don't want to think it's something more and then find out it's not. Ren leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees as he stared at Kaito. Look, I'm not going to pretend I know what's going on in Aiko's head. But I do know one thing. You're not just some guy to her. Anyone with half a brain can see that. Kaito shook his head. You don't know that. Then maybe you should ask her, Ren said, his tone firm but not unkind. Instead of assuming the worst, maybe give her a chance to prove you wrong. Kaito didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the water. Ren sighed and stood, brushing dirt off his pants. Just think about it, man, Ren said as he turned to leave. But don't wait too long. Aiko's not the kind of girl who'll wait around forever. As Ren disappeared into the trees, Kaito let out another sigh, his thoughts swirling. He didn't know what he'd do next, but one thing was clear. Ignoring his feelings wasn't working. And if he wanted answers, he'd have to face them, and Aiko head on. The campfire had dwindled to glowing embers, the group of students now scattered across the campsite, chatting quietly or heading back to their tents. The cool night air carried a faint chill, and the moon cast a silver glow over the clearing. Aiko stood by the edge of the lake, skipping stones across the still surface, her pink ponytail swaying with each motion. Hana approached from behind, her golden hair catching the moonlight. For a moment, she hesitated, watching Aiko with a guarded expression, but something in her chest urged her forward. She wasn't sure if it was frustration, jealousy, or a need to clear the air. Maybe all three. You're out late, Hana said, her voice cutting through the quiet. Aiko turned, her usual bright smile noticeably absent. Could say the same about you. Hana stepped closer, crossing her arms. Mind if I join? Be my guest, Aiko replied, skipping another stone. It landed with a soft plop, sinking quickly. The silence between them was thick with unspoken tension. Hana watched Aiko's movements, noticing the lack of her usual energy. The girl who always seemed so vibrant now looked tired. I don't get you, Hana said finally, her tone sharp but not unkind. Aiko raised an eyebrow, glancing at her. What do you mean? You act like you're everyone's best friend, like nothing bothers you, Hana said, her voice rising slightly. But then you swoop in and take over, like this whole trip is your stage. Aiko's hand paused mid-throw, her fingers gripping the stone tightly. She let out a bitter laugh. Is that what you think? That I'm just playing some game? I don't know what to think, Hana admitted. But you're always around Kaito, and he's changing because of you. I don't even know if it's for the better. Aiko turned to face her fully, her blue eyes flashing. And what exactly do you want, Hana? For things to go back to how they were? For Kaito to stay stuck in your shadow? Hana flinched, the words cutting deeper than she expected. That's not what I meant. Then what do you mean? Aiko pressed, stepping closer. Because from where I'm standing, it feels like you're upset that someone else cares about him, that someone else is trying to help him. Hana's chest tightened, her emotions threatening to spill over. I care about him too. I've always cared about him. Then why did you push him away? Aiko shot back, her voice trembling with restrained anger. Hana's breath caught. She hadn't expected Aiko to say it outright, to bring up the moment that had lingered like a shadow over her friendship with Kaito. I didn't mean to hurt him, Hana said quietly, her voice wavering. I thought I was doing the right thing. But now? She trailed off, her gaze dropping to the ground. Aiko's expression softened, the anger fading into something more sympathetic. But now you're afraid he's moving on. Hana looked up, tears glistening in her green eyes. Yes, and I hate it. I hate that I might have ruined things forever, but I don't know how to fix it. Aiko's shoulders stiffened again, her sympathy replaced by frustration. You can't keep playing it both ways, Hana. Either you want to be part of his life, or you step back and let someone else try. But don't act like you're the only one who gets to decide what's best for him. Hana opened her mouth to reply, but Aiko held up a hand, stopping her. You know what? Forget it. I can't do this right now. Without waiting for a response, Aiko turned on her heel and stormed off, heading toward the woods that bordered the campsite. Her footsteps were quick and determined, but there was a shakiness to her movements that hinted at how deeply the argument had rattled her. Aiko! Hana called after her, but Aiko didn't stop. She disappeared into the shadows of the trees, leaving Hana standing by the lake with a heavy weight in her chest. The further Aiko walked, the quieter the world became. The campsite's warm glow faded into the distance, replaced by the cool darkness of the forest. Her breaths came quickly, not from exertion, but from the storm of emotions raging inside her. She wanted to scream, to cry, to do anything to let it all out, but instead, she just kept walking. Why does it always feel like I have to prove myself? She muttered under her breath, kicking a loose rock on the path. Why does everyone think they know what's best for him? For me? The trees around her rustled softly in the breeze, their shadows stretching long in the moonlight. Aiko hugged her arms to herself, the chill of the night finally starting to seep in. She paused, leaning against a tree to catch her breath. Her head tilted back, and she stared up at the canopy of leaves, patches of stars peeking through. I just want to matter to someone, she whispered. A sudden noise snapped her out of her thoughts, a rustling in the underbrush nearby. Aiko straightened, her heart racing. Hello? She called, her voice steady despite the unease creeping up her spine. The rustling grew louder, closer. Aiko backed up instinctively, her mind racing with possibilities. Maybe I shouldn't have come out here alone, she muttered, scanning the darkness. Just as she was about to turn back, her foot caught on a root and she stumbled, landing hard on the ground. A sharp pain shot through her ankle as she tried to stand, and she winced, clutching at the injured limb. Great, she groaned, the frustration bubbling up again. This is just perfect. Ren and Kaito were sitting by the dying fire, talking quietly when Hana approached, her expression troubled. Where's Aiko? Ren asked, noticing her unease. She went into the woods, Hana admitted, her voice tight with guilt. We argued, and she stormed off. Kaito shot to his feet, his dark eyes widening. What? Why didn't you stop her? I tried, Hana said, wringing her hands. But she wouldn't listen. Kaito didn't wait for more details. Grabbing a flashlight from the supply table, he turned to Ren. Stay here in case she comes back. I'm going to find her. Be careful, Ren called after him, his usual humor replaced by genuine concern. Kaito nodded sharply and disappeared into the woods, his heart pounding with worry. All he could think about was Aiko, lost, hurt, or worse, and how he had to find her, no matter what. The forest was darker than Kaito had anticipated, the thick canopy of leaves blocking out much of the moonlight. His flashlight cast narrow beams of light ahead of him, illuminating the uneven path and the occasional gnarled tree root. He clutched the device tightly, his other hand gripping his phone as he repeatedly tried to call Aiko. No signal. Damn it, Kaito muttered, glancing at his phone screen. The frustration in his voice echoed his growing worry. His heart pounded, and it wasn't just from the physical effort of weaving through the woods. Aiko's face flashed in his mind, her laughter, her teasing grins, the way her blue eyes seemed to sparkle with mischief. He couldn't stand the thought of her out here alone, especially after the argument she'd had with Hana. She's probably fine, he told himself, though the words rang hollow. She's strong. She knows how to handle herself. But the nagging voice in his head wouldn't let up. What if she's not fine? What if something happened to her? He quickened his pace, his flashlight darting left and right as he scanned the woods for any sign of her. The shadows seemed to twist and stretch, and the rustling of leaves sounded louder in the stillness. Every sound made his pulse spike, only for the tension to crash down again when it wasn't her. Aiko, he called, his voice hoarse. Where are you? The forest offered no response, just the whisper of the wind through the branches. He clenched his teeth, the fear creeping in deeper with every passing moment. As Kaito trudged through the woods, his mind spiraled. He couldn't stop thinking about their last conversation, the way Aiko had looked at him, confused and maybe even hurt when he'd questioned her intentions. He replayed his words, realizing now how they might have sounded. Why did I say that? He muttered, guilt threading through his voice. She's always been there for me. She didn't deserve that. He thought about how Aiko had been a constant light in his life recently. Ever since the field trip started, her energy had made the group dynamic livelier, even as tension simmered between her and Hana. Aiko had always been the one to pull him out of his shell, to make him laugh when he didn't think he could. But now, his words and actions were playing on a loop in his mind. Had he pushed her too far? Had his insecurities, his fears of misreading someone's feelings again, created a rift he couldn't mend? The memory of Hana's rejection loomed large, a painful reminder of how easily he could misinterpret someone's kindness. "Am I doing it again?" he whispered, his voice breaking through the quiet. "Am I screwing this up just like before?" He glanced at the flashlight in his hand, the beam quivering slightly with his uneven grip. The thought of Aiko alone in the woods, hurt or scared, gnawed at him. She had always been there for him, steadfast, warm, and unyielding. He couldn't let this moment define them. "I can't lose her too," he whispered, his voice resolute this time. He tightened his grip on the flashlight and pressed forward, his determination burning brighter than the light piercing the darkness. A faint sound broke through the quiet, something rustling in the underbrush, distinct from the whisper of the wind. Kaito froze, his breath catching. "Aiko?" he called, stepping cautiously toward the sound. The rustling grew louder, and for a fleeting moment his heart soared with hope. He quickened his pace, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the darkness. But as he moved closer, the light revealed nothing more than a startled rabbit, its wide eyes reflecting the glow before it darted away into the shadows. "Damn it!" Kaito hissed, frustration surging through him as he ran a trembling hand through his hair. His chest felt tight, the weight of fear and helplessness pressing down hard. For a moment he stood still, letting the quiet sink in. The silence was deafening, amplifying the pounding of his heart. But then he shook his head, forcing himself to move. He couldn't stop now, not when Aiko could be out there, waiting for help. He pressed forward, his senses on high alert. Every snap of a twig, every whisper of leaves drew his attention. The forest seemed alive with movement, though none of it led him to her. His voice grew louder, his calls more urgent. "Aiko! Please say something!" The echo of his voice faded into the vastness of the woods, but he didn't let the silence deter him. With every step, his determination only grew. He wouldn't stop until he found her. He couldn't. Finally, Kaito's flashlight caught a faint shimmer lying just off the path. His heart leapt as he hurried over, the beam revealing a small, familiar object. It was a bracelet, the sunflower charm glinting faintly in the light. He dropped to his knees, picking it up with trembling hands. "Aiko," he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of emotion. The bracelet was unmistakable, Aiko's favorite. He'd seen her wear it almost every day. Relief surged through him at the confirmation that she had been here, but it was quickly drowned out by dread. She wasn't here now. What if she had fallen? What if she was hurt and couldn't call out for help? Kaito clutched the bracelet tightly, his knuckles white. He forced himself to his feet, pocketing the charm with a deep, shaky breath. His fear transformed into raw determination, his steps growing quicker and more purposeful. "I'll find you," he muttered, his voice steady and resolute despite the storm of emotions inside him. "I swear I'll find you, Aiko." Fueled by a mixture of desperation and hope, Kaito pressed on, his flashlight cutting through the darkness as he called out her name with everything he had. The forest seemed endless, the shadows stretching endlessly as Kaito pushed forward, his resolve stronger than the ache in his legs or the burn in his lungs. "Aiko!" he called out again, his voice raw but unwavering. This time, a faint sound answered him, a soft, barely audible whimper. He froze, his breath catching. "Aiko!" he shouted, his flashlight whipping toward the sound. "Kaito?" came a weak, trembling reply. Relief and fear flooded him in equal measure as he sprinted toward the voice, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the dense darkness. Finally, he saw her, slumped against the base of a tree, her pink ponytail disheveled and her clothes streaked with dirt. One leg was awkwardly outstretched, and she clutched it gingerly with trembling hands. "Aiko!" Kaito dropped to his knees beside her, his flashlight clattering to the ground as he reached out instinctively. "Are you okay? What happened?" She looked up at him, her blue eyes glistening with unshed tears. I tripped. My ankle, it hurts," she admitted, her voice shaky. Kaito's chest tightened at the sight of her discomfort. "Let me see," he said gently, his hands steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. He carefully examined her ankle, the sight of the swelling and forming bruise making his stomach churn. "You shouldn't have come," Aiko murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm such an idiot." "Don't say that," Kaito said firmly, meeting her eyes with a look of unshakable determination. "I couldn't just leave you out here." Her gaze fell to the ground, her fingers curling into the dirt. "I didn't mean to make things harder for everyone. For you." "Stop," Kaito interrupted softly, his tone gentle but resolute. He reached for her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You don't have to explain. You're not a burden. Let me help you." For a moment, neither of them spoke, the forest around them falling into a hush. Kaito's warmth and steady presence seemed to reach Aiko, her tense shoulders relaxing slightly. Kaito stood, brushing off dirt from his knees, then crouched down in front of Aiko with his back toward her. "Come on, I'll carry you." Aiko blinked, her cheeks flushing as she stared at him. "What? No way. I'm too heavy." "You're not," Kaito interrupted, glancing back over his shoulder, his tone steady and unyielding. "You're hurt, and we need to get you back to camp. This isn't up for debate." She hesitated, clearly torn between her embarrassment and the pain in her ankle. "But, Aiko," Kaito said, his voice softening, though it remained firm. "Trust me." Her resistance melted at his words, and she sighed in defeat. Carefully, she shifted forward, wrapping her arms around his shoulders as she winced from the effort. Kaito hooked his arms under her legs and hoisted her onto his back with surprising ease. "See? Not heavy at all," he said, his voice warm, tinged with a faint smile. Aiko buried her face in his shoulder, her voice muffled but laced with disbelief. "You're just saying that." "I'm not," Kaito replied, adjusting his grip to make sure she was secure. "You're way lighter than Ren's gym bag, and that thing's practically full of bricks." A soft laugh bubbled up from Aiko despite herself, breaking through the tension. "You're ridiculous." "Maybe," Kaito said, his lips twitching into a smile. "But I'm also the guy carrying you out of here, so I'd say I'm doing okay." Aiko leaned into him, her laughter fading into a quiet sigh. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Kaito's heart gave a small lurch, but he kept his focus on the trail ahead. "Anytime," he said, his tone steady and sincere. "Let's get you home." As Kaito made his way through the forest, the two fell into a comfortable silence. The sound of his footsteps and the occasional rustle of leaves filled the air, but Kaito's thoughts were louder than the forest. Her weight on his back felt grounding, and despite the situation, he was struck by how much he wanted to keep her close. He glanced over his shoulder at her, noticing the way her pink hair framed her face, her head resting lightly against him. "You okay back there?" he asked softly. "Yeah," she replied, her voice quieter now, almost tender. "Thanks, Kaito, for coming to find me." He hesitated for a moment, the sincerity in her words hitting him harder than he expected. "I'd do it again," he said quietly, his voice steady. 100 times if I had to." Aiko's arms tightened slightly around his shoulders, and she whispered, barely loud enough to hear, "You're too good to me." Kaito didn't respond immediately, the weight of her words stirring something deep inside him. "Am I? Or is it just because you're too good for me?" he wondered, but kept the thought to himself. Instead, he adjusted his grip, making sure she was secure, and kept moving forward. For now, the argument, the tension, and the confusion could wait. All that mattered was that she was with him, and he wasn't going to let her go. The glow of the campfire in the distance was a welcome sight as Kaito carried Aiko through the final stretch of the forest. By now, his legs ached, and his shirt clung to his back, damp with sweat. But he pushed through, determined not to let her see how tired he was. As they emerged into the clearing, a wave of relief washed over him. Ren was the first to spot them, standing up abruptly. "Finally! What the hell happened?" Hana, who had been pacing near the fire, froze when she saw them. Her expression shifted from worry to something unreadable, her arms crossing tightly over her chest. Kaito gently lowered Aiko onto a nearby bench, careful not to jar her injured ankle. "She twisted her ankle in the woods," he explained, his voice steady but edged with exhaustion. "She couldn't walk back, so I carried her." Ren quickly knelt beside Aiko, his usual playful demeanor softened by concern. "You really went all out for the drama, huh?" He teased lightly, though his eyes scanned her ankle carefully. Aiko managed a weak smile, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. "What can I say? I like to keep things interesting. Hana stepped closer, her movements hesitant. Are you okay? She asked, her tone quieter than usual. I'll be fine, Aiko said, glancing between Hana and Kaito. Kaito made sure of that. Hana's lips pressed into a thin line, her gaze lingering on Kaito. You could have gotten hurt too, running around the woods like that, she said, her words sharper now, though the concern was evident in her voice. Kaito shrugged, brushing off her comment. It doesn't matter. She needed help. The tension in the air was thick, the unspoken emotions between them palpable. Ren, sensing the need to diffuse the moment, clapped his hands together. All right, let's get some ice on that ankle. I'll grab the first aid kit. Aiko gave a small nod, her gaze softening as she looked up at Kaito. Thank you, she said quietly. Kaito met her eyes, the exhaustion momentarily forgotten. Anytime, he replied, his voice low but firm. Later that night, the camp was cloaked in a serene quiet. Most of the students had turned in for the night, but Kaito remained by the campfire, the last flickers of its embers casting faint, glowing shadows. He sat alone, the cool night air wrapping around him, but his thoughts were anything but calm. The day's events played on a loop in his mind. Aiko's vulnerability, her tears, the way she'd clung to him as he carried her back to safety. Her words echoed softly in his head. You're too good to me. Am I really? He thought. Or am I just doing all this because I want her to feel the same way I do? His chest tightened at the thought, his emotions tangling into a knot he couldn't quite unravel. The fire's embers crackled faintly, breaking the stillness, but it wasn't enough to pull him from his spiraling thoughts. A quiet voice broke through the silence. Can't sleep either? Kaito looked up, startled to see Hana approaching, a blanket draped loosely over her shoulders. Her golden hair caught the faint glow of the fire as she sat down beside him. Her expression was calm but unreadable, her green eyes flickering with something he couldn't quite place. You've been quiet since you got back, she said softly, tilting her head to look at him. I'm just tired, Kaito replied, though he knew it was only part of the truth. Hana didn't push him for more. Instead, they sat in silence for a while, the sound of the forest filling the space between them. Then, after a moment, she spoke again, her voice lower. You really care about her, don't you? Kaito's chest tightened further, but he kept his gaze fixed on the fading embers. She's my friend, he said quietly. Of course I care. Hana turned toward him, her green eyes searching his face as if trying to read the thoughts he wasn't sharing. You're more than just friends, aren't you? The question lingered in the air, heavy and unspoken. Kaito didn't answer. He couldn't, not because he didn't know the answer, but because saying it aloud would make it feel too real. His eyes stayed on the embers, watching as they burned down to ash. Hana sighed, and her tone softened. Just don't lose yourself in trying to make her happy, okay? You deserve to be happy too. Her words hit him harder than he expected, striking a chord deep in his chest. Before he could think of a response, Hana stood, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Without another word, she walked away, her figure fading into the shadows of the tents. Kaito stayed by the fire, the weight of her words settling over him like a second blanket. Don't lose yourself. He stared at the dying embers, wondering how to follow advice that seemed so simple, yet felt impossibly hard. The next morning, Kaito hesitated as he approached the breakfast area. The sun was shining, and the camp buzzed with activity, but his steps felt heavier than usual. Aiko was seated at a table with Karin, Rika, and Takeshi, her pink ponytail catching the light as she laughed at something Takeshi said. Her ankle rested on a small stool wrapped in a neat bandage. Kaito paused, considering retreating to avoid the knot of emotions tightening in his chest. He wasn't sure how to face Aiko after everything that had happened the night before. The argument, her vulnerability, the unspoken feelings hanging between them. But before he could slip away, Aiko spotted him. Kaito, she called, her voice warm and inviting as she waved him over. Come sit with us. Her smile was as bright as ever, but it felt like a sharp contrast to the heaviness in Kaito's heart. Steeling himself, he walked over and sat across from her, forcing himself to meet her gaze. How's the ankle? He asked, his voice quieter than usual. Better thanks to you, Aiko replied, her tone sincere but light. I really appreciate it. You saved me out there. You don't owe me anything, Kaito said, looking down at his plate, He poked at the food with his fork, his appetite long gone. Aiko tilted her head, her smile fading slightly as she studied him. Are you okay? You've been distant. Kaito opened his mouth to respond. The words caught somewhere between his thoughts and his tongue. But before he could say anything, Takeshi leaned over, his grin wide. Don't worry about him, Aiko. He's probably just sore from carrying you all that way, Takeshi joked, his tone teasing. The table erupted into laughter, Karin and Rika joining in as Aiko chuckled along. Kaito tried to smile, but it felt forced, his chest tightening with each passing second. He glanced at Aiko, her laughter ringing out, and for a moment he felt a pang of longing and frustration. Yeah, he mumbled, his voice barely audible. Probably. As the conversation carried on, Kaito sank further into his thoughts. The laughter and chatter around him became a distant hum, drowned out by the weight of his emotions. He couldn't shake the feeling that something important was slipping through his fingers, something he didn't fully understand but knew he couldn't bear to lose. And the fear that he might never get it back lingered like a shadow, heavy and unrelenting. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the campgrounds. It was the final day of the trip, and the students were making the most of their last moments of freedom. The air buzzed with excitement, laughter echoing from different corners of the camp as small groups scattered to enjoy the remaining hours. Kaito leaned against a tree near the camp's center, his gaze fixed on the lively scene ahead. Aiko sat with Karin and Rika, her pink ponytail catching the sunlight as she laughed at something Takeshi said. The sight made Kaito's chest tighten, the nagging weight of his thoughts refusing to leave him. She looks like she's already made plans, Kaito muttered, his voice low and bitter. Talking to yourself now? Ren's voice broke through his thoughts as he approached, casual but sharp. That's usually my thing. Not now, Ren, Kaito replied with a sigh, not bothering to look at him. Ren stepped beside him, crossing his arms as he observed the scene. You're sulking. It's the last day of the trip, and you're still brooding. Just go talk to her. What's the point? Kaito asked, bitterness creeping into his tone. She's already busy with them. Ren rolled his eyes and smacked the back of Kaito's head lightly. Stop being an idiot. You carried her out of the woods yesterday. That counts for something. Kaito rubbed the back of his head, glaring at Ren. You don't understand. No, you don't understand, Ren countered, his tone sharpening. If you keep hesitating, someone else is going to step in. Is that what you want? Kaito's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. Right, Ren continued, stepping back. Guess you're fine with Takeshi swooping in then. That was the final push Kaito needed. With a determined breath, he straightened and started walking toward Aiko. Each step felt heavier than the last, but he kept going, his heart pounding in his chest. Karin and Rika noticed him first, their conversation trailing off as he approached. Aiko turned, her smile faltering slightly when she saw him. Hey, Kaito, she said, her voice uncertain. What's up? Can we talk? Kaito asked, glancing at her friends. Alone. Aiko blinked in surprise, then nodded. Sure. She stepped away from the group, following him toward a quieter spot near the edge of the lake. They walked in silence, with the crunch of leaves beneath their feet, the only sound between them. When they stopped, Aiko turned to face him, her expression curious but cautious. What's on your mind? She asked gently. Kaito hesitated, his gaze fixed on the rippling water. I wasn't sure you'd want to talk to me today. You seemed busy. Aiko frowned, her brows knitting together. Why wouldn't I want to talk to you? You've been avoiding me. I haven't been avoiding you, Kaito said quickly, though the words felt hollow. I thought you'd rather spend time with them. Where is this coming from? Aiko asked, her frown deepening. Kaito took a shaky breath, forcing himself to meet her gaze. It feels like I'm just there. Like you're nice to me because you feel bad, not because you actually want to. Aiko's eyes widened in shock. She stepped closer, her tone sharp but not unkind. You really think that? I don't know, Kaito admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Aiko grabbed his arm, her blue eyes searching his face. Kaito, stop. That's not true. I'm not nice to you because I feel bad. I'm nice to you because I like being around you. His breath caught. You do? Yes, Aiko said firmly, her grip on his arm tightening. You're important to me, Kaito, more than you probably realize. A surge of relief and guilt flooded him. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have doubted you. Aiko shook her head, her voice softening. I get it. You've been hurt before, haven't you? By someone you cared about. Her words hit him like a blow, and he nodded, unable to speak. Well, she continued, her tone gentler now, I'm not her, and I'm not going anywhere. Kaito swallowed hard, his throat tightening. I don't want to lose you, Aiko. You won't, she said, a small smile breaking through her seriousness. But you've got to stop overthinking everything. He let out a quiet laugh, the tension between them easing slightly. I'll try. Good, Aiko said, stepping back with a playful grin. Now that we've got that sorted, how about we actually enjoy what's left of this trip? Kaito nodded, a genuine smile tugging at his lips. Yeah, let's do that. As they walked back toward the camp side by side, Kaito felt the weight in his chest start to lift. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to hope that things might finally be okay. The afternoon sun shimmered over the lake, casting golden ripples across its surface. The sound of laughter and distant chatter filled the air as students made the most of their free time. Aiko tugged lightly on Kaito's sleeve, her blue eyes sparkling with an idea. Kaito, come with me, she said, her voice bright but insistent. Where are we going? He asked, allowing himself to be led toward the path that wound down to the lake. You'll see, Aiko replied with a playful grin. Just trust me. The two walked in comfortable silence, the noise of the camp fading into the background as they ventured closer to the water. Aiko hummed softly, her ponytail swaying with each step. Kaito found himself relaxing, the tension that had weighed on him for days slowly dissolving in her presence. When they reached the lake's edge, Aiko stopped and turned to face him. The sunlight danced in her pink hair, and Kaito couldn't help but think how effortlessly she seemed to brighten any space she occupied. Here, she said, pulling her phone from her pocket. I want to take a picture. A picture? Kaito echoed, raising an eyebrow. Why? To remember this, Aiko said, her tone softer now. This trip, this moment, us. Kaito's heart skipped a beat at her words. Okay, he said quietly, stepping closer as Aiko held up her phone. Smile, she said, angling the camera so they both fit into the frame. Kaito tried his best, though his smile was more hesitant than hers. Aiko, as always, beamed brightly, her energy radiating even through the lens. After snapping a few shots, Aiko flipped through them, showing Kaito the results. Not bad, huh? Kaito glanced at the pictures, his eyes lingering on the one where Aiko had leaned slightly toward him, her smile wide and genuine. Yeah, he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. It's nice. Aiko lowered the phone and looked at him, her expression shifting. Thank you, Kaito. For what? He asked, tilting his head. For being here, she said simply, for putting up with me, for everything. Before he could respond, Aiko stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. The hug was sudden, and Kaito froze for a moment, caught off guard by the gesture. But as her warmth seeped into him, he found himself relaxing, his arms hesitantly moving to return the embrace. Aiko? He murmured, his voice barely audible. She didn't say anything, holding him tighter instead. Kaito closed his eyes, letting the moment sink in. The world around them seemed to fade, leaving only the sound of their breathing and the gentle lapping of the lake. When Aiko finally pulled back, her cheeks were slightly flushed, but her smile remained. There! Now we'll have more than just a picture to remember this by. Kaito chuckled softly, his own face warm. You're full of surprises, aren't you? Maybe, Aiko said, her playful tone returning. But you wouldn't have me any other way, right? Right, Kaito said, his voice steady despite the fluttering in his chest. As they walked back toward the camp, side by side, Kaito couldn't help but glance at Aiko, his mind replaying the hug. For the first time, he felt like the distance between them had truly closed, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something he'd never forget. The field trip was winding down, and the students began gathering their belongings as teachers called out instructions. The parking lot was alive with the hustle and bustle of students boarding their respective buses, their chatter loud with recounts of adventures and laughter from shared memories. Kaito slung his bag over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the crowd. Aiko was with her class near their bus, her vibrant pink ponytail making her easy to spot. She was laughing with Karen and Takeshi, her energy as infectious as ever. He sighed softly, turning toward his own bus. Still looking at her? Ren teased, nudging Kaito with his elbow. Kaito shook his head. It's nothing. Just making sure everything's in order. Sure, sure, Ren said with a smirk. Well, guess this is it for now. Let's head on. As Kaito climbed onto the bus and made his way down the aisle, he resigned himself to the fact that he wouldn't get to spend any more time with Aiko until they returned home. He found an empty seat near the back and settled in, leaning his head against the window. Minutes passed as the bus filled with students, but Kaito remained lost in thought. He replayed the moments from the trip, the scavenger hunt, the lake, Aiko's hug. A small smile tugged at his lips, but it was tinged with a longing he couldn't quite shake. Kaito! Ren called from a few rows up, breaking him from his thoughts. Don't look so gloomy, man. We're heading home, not to prison. Kaito gave a half-hearted chuckle. Yeah. Just as the teacher began doing a head count and preparing to close the doors, a commotion erupted near the front. Kaito glanced up, his heart skipping a beat as Aiko stepped onto the bus, her pink hair bouncing with each step. What is she doing here? Kaito muttered under his breath. Aiko ignored the stares from the other students and made her way down the aisle, her eyes locking onto Kaito's. She plopped down in the empty seat beside him, her bright smile unfazed by the curious whispers around them. Hi, she said cheerfully, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Aiko, why are you here? Kaito asked, his voice hushed but tinged with disbelief. Because I wanted to be, she said simply, leaning back in the seat. What? You didn't think I'd leave without saying goodbye, did you? This isn't goodbye, Kaito said, frowning. You're supposed to be on your class's bus. They'll survive without me, Aiko said with a wave of her hand. I told the teacher I had unfinished business. Unfinished business? Kaito repeated, raising an eyebrow. Aiko grinned, leaning closer so only he could hear. I wanted to ride with you. Is that so bad? Kaito's face warmed, and he glanced away, unsure how to respond. You're impossible. Maybe, Aiko said, her tone teasing. But admit it, you're glad I'm here. Ren turned in his seat, a wide grin spreading across his face as he took in the scene. Well, looks like someone's got a VIP passenger. Ren? Kaito muttered, glaring at him. What? Ren said, holding up his hands in mock innocence. I'm just saying this trip just got a whole lot more interesting. Aiko laughed, her eyes sparkling with mischief. I'll take that as a compliment. As the bus started moving, Kaito found himself relaxing despite the chaos Aiko had caused. Her presence was like a burst of sunlight breaking through a cloudy day, and though he'd never admit it out loud, he was more than glad she was there. For the rest of the ride, Aiko kept up a steady stream of chatter, her energy pulling Kaito out of his shell. Even the teasing from Ren and the curious glances from their classmates couldn't dampen the moment. By the time the bus pulled into the school parking lot, Kaito felt lighter than he had in weeks. As they stepped off the bus, Aiko turned to him with a grin. See? That wasn't so bad, she said. Kaito shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. You're something else. And you love it, Aiko said with a wink before skipping off to join her classmates. As Kaito watched her go, he couldn't help but think that she was right. She was impossible, unpredictable, and completely unlike anyone he'd ever known. And for the first time, he realized that maybe that wasn't such a bad thing after all. The evening sky was painted in soft shades of pink and orange as the buses emptied, students dispersing into the city streets with the energy of the field trip still buzzing in the air. Kaito adjusted his bag on his shoulder, lingering near the school gate. Ren had already jogged ahead, waving over his shoulder. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Ren called with a laugh before disappearing into the crowd. Kaito sighed, half smiling at his friend's antics when a familiar voice called out behind him. Kaito! He turned to see Aiko jogging toward him, her pink ponytail bouncing with each step. She stopped just short of him, slightly out of breath but grinning as always. Walking home alone? She asked, tilting her head. Yeah, Kaito said, his tone casual. Ren bailed. Good, Aiko said with a wink, looping her arm through his without hesitation. Then I've got you all to myself. Kaito blinked, caught off guard by her boldness. You really don't ask permission for anything, do you? Nope, she said brightly, tugging him toward the sidewalk. And you're not complaining, so it works out. As they strolled through the quiet streets, Aiko filled the air with her usual chatter, sharing stories from the trip, teasing Kaito about his awkwardness with Takeshi, and even mimicking Ren's exaggerated bravado. Kaito found himself laughing more than he had in weeks, and the tension from the trip melting away with each step. When they reached a tree-lined stretch of the walk, Aiko's pace slowed. She looked up at the stars beginning to dot the sky, her voice softening. "This reminds me of that night at the lake." Kaito glanced at her, surprised by the shift in her tone. "Yeah, that was nice." "It was," Aiko agreed, her smile faint. She stopped walking and turned to face him, her blue eyes searching his. "Thanks for finding me that night, by the way. I don't think I said it enough." "You don't have to thank me," Kaito said, his voice quieter. I couldn't leave you out there." Aiko hesitated, then stepped closer, her expression unusually serious. "I mean it, Kaito. You've been there for me in ways no one else has. Even when I act like I've got it all together, you still see me." Her words struck something deep within him, and he felt his chest tighten. "You're the one who's always brightening things up," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just me. Just you?" Aiko repeated, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Kaito, you don't give yourself enough credit." He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Aiko closed the gap between them, wrapping her arms around him in a firm, warm hug. Kaito stiffened for a moment, caught off guard by the sudden contact, but then he relaxed, his arms slowly moving to return the embrace. They stood there in the quiet street, the world around them fading into the background. Kaito's heart pounded in his chest as he felt Aiko's warmth, her presence grounding him in a way that felt almost surreal. When she pulled back slightly, her face was mere inches from his. Her blue eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was charged with something unspoken, something Kaito could no longer ignore. Without thinking, he leaned forward, his lips brushing against hers in a soft, hesitant kiss. Aiko's eyes widened in surprise, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into him, her hands clutching the fabric of his shirt as the kiss deepened for a brief, breathtaking moment. When they finally broke apart, both of them were blushing, their breaths uneven. Aiko was the first to speak, her voice quieter than usual. "Well, that's one way to say goodnight." Kaito flushed, rubbing the back of his neck. I didn't mean to." She cut him off with a gentle laugh, her smile soft and genuine. "Kaito, it's okay, really." They stood in silence for a moment longer before Aiko took his hand, lacing her fingers with his. "Walk me the rest of the way home?" Kaito nodded, his heart still racing. "Yeah, let's go." As they continued down the street, their hands intertwined, Kaito felt a strange sense of clarity. He didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, walking beside Aiko under the stars, he felt like he'd finally found a piece of himself he hadn't known was missing. The train ride back was filled with the buzz of students reliving their favorite moments from the trip. Hana, however, sat silently by the window, her green eyes focused on the landscape rushing past. May was beside her, nibbling on a snack and scrolling through her phone, but even her usual cheerful demeanor was subdued. Finally, May broke the silence. "You've been quiet since we left. Spill it." Hana's lips pressed into a thin line, her fingers gripping her phone tightly. "There's nothing to spill," she said softly, though her tone betrayed her frustration. May sighed, setting her phone down. "Don't give me that. I've known you long enough to see when you're stewing over something. Is this about Kaito and Aiko?" Hana stiffened, her gaze darting away. May's bluntness was always a double-edged sword, something she appreciated at times and resented at others. "It's not just about them," Hana muttered. "It's about everything." May raised an eyebrow. "Everything?" "Yeah," Hana said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I keep thinking about the way things used to be, back when it was just Kaito, Ren, and me. Before Aiko showed up, before everything got so complicated." May leaned back in her seat, crossing her arms. "You mean back when you didn't have to think about what you actually wanted?" Hana's head snapped toward her, her expression defensive. "What's that supposed to mean?" May shrugged, but her gaze was sharp. "It means you were comfortable. You didn't have to deal with the fact that you've been taking Kaito for granted for years. Now that someone else is making him happy, you're realizing what you had." Hana flinched, her fingers curling into fists in her lap. I didn't think it would turn out like this. I thought." She stopped herself, swallowing hard. I thought I had time. May's voice softened, though it still held a note of firmness. You might have had time once, but not anymore. And you know what? That's okay. What's not okay is you pretending you're mad at Aiko when you're really mad at yourself. Hana's eyes burned, but she blinked back the tears threatening to fall. It's not that simple, May. She doesn't deserve him. She doesn't even know him like I do. Maybe not, May said, leaning forward, but she's trying. She's giving him something you never did, a chance. Hana looked away, her reflection in the train window distorted by the tears she refused to let fall. May's words struck a chord she couldn't ignore, but admitting it felt like a betrayal of everything she'd held onto for so long. After a moment, May sighed again, softer this time. Look, Hana, I'm not saying you should give up. If you really care about Kaito, fight for him. But don't make this about tearing Aiko down. Make it about showing him why you're the right person for him. And maybe, just maybe, figure out what you really want first. Hana didn't respond immediately, her mind racing with conflicting thoughts. May's words were harsh but true, and they left her feeling exposed in a way she hadn't expected. I don't know if I can, Hana said finally, her voice small. What if it's too late? May placed a hand on her shoulder, her grip firm. Then at least you'll know you tried. And if it's not too late, well, then you'll have to fight like hell. The train jolted slightly, signaling their arrival back in the city. Students began gathering their belongings, their chatter growing louder. Hana stayed seated, her mind a whirlwind of emotions she didn't yet know how to untangle. As the train slowed to a stop, May stood and glanced back at her. Think about what I said, okay? But don't think too long, or someone else might beat you to it. Hana nodded numbly, her gaze still fixed on the window as May walked away. The reflection staring back at her looked uncertain, vulnerable, nothing like the confident person she'd always thought she was. Fight for him, she whispered to herself, the words both a promise and a challenge.